All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll call this second day's worth of hearings meeting to order for the full Committee of Ways and Means. I certainly want to thank again each very dedicated member of this committee just for showing up. Thank y'all. Taking away from your personal time before the session, it does not go unnoticed, and I appreciate it. I hope the people of Georgia do as well. Does anybody have anything for the good of the committee before we begin our hearings and deliberations? There won't be much different from yesterday. I ask you to hold your questions till the end of the testimony if possible. Yes, sir. Yes. What's the new folder? Do you know? Most people took them with them yesterday. So the new ones are just where some folks took theirs yesterday, and we just replaced them with the same thing. So, not a trick. All right. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be hearing first this morning from a great friend, I guess, of this place, representative of the Georgia Retail Association, Mr. John Hebner. John, welcome. Good morning. We'll ask you to, if you want to be a little informal, you can sit and talk into that microphone. Might be easier, unless you want to use the podium. Either is certainly up to you. Good morning, sir, and welcome.
Thank you, Chairman O'Neill, members of the committee. It's great to have you back in town. Happy New Year to each and every one of you.
Thank you.
Promising to be an exciting session. Last June 3rd, Majority Leader Jerry King visited with the Georgia Retail Association Board of Directors and laid out for us what at that time was the great plan for Georgia. Since that time, the plan has changed quite a bit. However, the GRA and all the retailers across Georgia recognize the innate unfairness of taxing personal property and see such taxes as an eroding economic governmental activity. I want to repeat that. We see taxing personal property as an eroding economic government activity, an activity that, when exercised to its fullest, can destroy the American dream of home ownership and personal financial independence. So in principle, the Georgia Retail Association supports the abolishment of property taxes in Georgia. Having a job, even owning your own business, has been part of the American dream since this great nation was created. Determined individuals and hard-working men and women have strived to create some level of prosperity out of those dreams by opening or working in general stores, specialty shops, clothing stores, and many other businesses that you and I rely on for creature comforts and necessities. Yet those same hard-working, industrious retailers, who, by the way, employ 1 in 5 working Georgians, have become targets, easy targets for various levels of government looking for easy taxes. Such is the case with all of the ad valorem taxes in general, and particularly a tax that is now no longer in the bill, the ad valorem inventory tax. So to that end, the GRA is hopeful that you, our elected officials, will expand the scope of property tax relief, not only for homes and for automobiles, but will also include the ad valorem inventory tax in your discussions. The ad valorem inventory tax should be put back in because it makes Georgia very anti-competitive. Georgia is only one of 10 states nationwide, and the only state in the southeast. None of our neighbors have an ad valorem inventory tax. The ad valorem inventory tax drives businesses out of state. During a 3 hearings set back in 2005 by a subcommittee of this committee, you heard of many businesses who were building stores and especially warehouses out of state just to evade that unfair tax. And we lost jobs, we lost income, we lost economic growth in Georgia to some degree because of those moves. Georgia's ad valorem taxes also represent administrative nightmares for businesses. Can you imagine having each county set a rate at which they're going to collect taxes. Each city, each little taxing district decide what rate they're going to set taxes, and then evaluators will set assessments on those taxes. To the contrary, there's a wide variation from county to county, and you all know that. You all are aware of that. Leads to confusion amongst all my members, and the ambiguities and inconsistencies of application of the law create problems for us too. Most of our members, not all, most of our members are still mom and pop stores. We have members who have 50 or 60 stores across the state in many counties, and trying to work with such a morass of laws and rates is very anti-competitive and very anti-business. We do believe that the success and well-being of Georgia is linked directly to the fiscal well-being of the state's retail sector. Operating out of 72,000 establishments throughout the Peach State, retailers have annual sales of over $112 billion and remit sales taxes to the state of Georgia and to many counties in excess of $5 billion a year. Retailers, whether you know or not, have very small profit margins. Pennies on the dollar, 1 to 4% typically is what we see. And when you have taxes that are arbitrarily and capriciously set at county and local levels that really are anti-competitive taxes, it really creates an unfair playing field for our state retailers vis-a-vis our neighbors. And before I close, I want to talk about one other issue real quickly, and that's that we have come here before asking you to consider implementing legislation for the streamlined sales tax bill, which would give us more than enough money to capture any shortfall we'd have through property taxes. So we ask you to do two things for us. Do consider, three things actually. Do consider elimination of property taxes. Do consider adding the ad valorem inventory tax with that. And do consider passing enabling legislation that would allow Georgia to participate in collection of taxes on internet and catalog sales when federal laws make that a capability. To expand or keep taxes in Georgia, which are very uncompetitive, and avoid collecting taxes on internet sales and catalog sales where no brick and mortar activity in Georgia, no jobs in Georgia, no taxes in Georgia, really is a ludicrous and we think unfair activity. So in closing, we urge you to keep your discussions going, to keep an open mind, to really think about what will make Georgia prosperous, what will give Georgia jobs, what will make Georgia grow. And we knew once you do that, you'll do the right thing as you always do. So I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and committee members.
Mr. Chairman, would you be willing to answer a question or two of the committee? Number 10, who's that? Chair recognizes Chairman Mills for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, John, for your testimony. And this is really a question maybe for you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, yesterday I had written this down. I don't want the day to go by without at least mentioning it. Dealing with internet sales, how will this bill address service tax on those businesses or someone providing a service across the internet? As I read it, I was unclear, and that's the question.
I think we're all a little bit unclear about the service aspect kind of in its entirety. I think part of what we're about in this committee is going to be to get a more detailed idea of consumption services to the point of more than just generic definition like I think is currently in the bill. Now, the application to the internet, obviously that's going to be impacted significantly by the federal legislation, the status of that, whether it be service or goods sold. We're sort of all being preempted as that is concerned, and that's what the streamlined sales tax is. And I'd ask John if you want to expand a little bit more on that for the benefit of the committee and the audience, what that is.
I thank you for that opportunity, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. As you may know, retail sales, brick and mortar retail sales over the last couple of years have been slightly growing. This Christmas we were up about 5%, which sounds good, but in average we were up 9%. Catalog and internet sales were up 20% the last 3 years, each of the last 3 years. That not only hurts jobs and employment in Georgia, takes sales out of Georgia, but tax revenue from those streams escape Georgia. We don't tax catalog sales. We don't tax internet sales. We're looking for federal enabling legislation, which they've been looking at in D.C. for a couple of years now, called streamlined sales tax, which would set uniform standards that states would have to consider in collecting taxes from catalog and internet sales. We don't have to have those in place before we charge sales taxes on those items, but we do. We need to have enabling legislation done. I think internet sales are an amazing American entrepreneurial activity. I'm not against it. I do say for those people who build buildings, pay taxes, have payroll in Georgia, they should be treated the same and equally as those people who are having their base in Florida or Taiwan or wherever and have sales in Georgia of billions of dollars a year. And that's what we're looking for.
Any further, Mr. Mills? Number 27, who's that? Chairman Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, could you tell us, I know that we've looked at a fiscal note before on what this would mean to the state and the counties and the local taxing authorities. Somewhere in the order of $250, $270 million is a hit. But do we know what we lose for industries, for example, the furniture industry that's moved out of the state when it comes to, and other industries that are high-ticket items, when it comes to the loss of income tax or lost, splost, education lost, and these related items?
I don't have a figure for that, and I'll try to get that for you. I'm not asked that of my members. I will tell you the state's largest department store built a warehouse in Tennessee. One of the largest furniture stores built a warehouse in North Carolina just because of inventory taxes. So we have been blessed. Now I'll tell you, we've got a real paradox here in Georgia as well. We've got one of the best ports in the nation, maybe in the world, and we're having people build warehouses here in spite of that. I tell you, if we do away with the inventory tax, we'll see more warehouses go, and we'll see Savannah grow and Brunswick as they've never grown before. So we need to invigorate the economy, and the best way to invigorate the economy is take out fiscal obstacles which will stop growth, and I think this is one that will stop growth from.
I think that was the chairman of our Economic Development Committee you were telling that to as
Great
well.
chairman, sir.
Number 6, who is that, please? Representative Flood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, John. Thank you for your testimony. I apologize. I came in a little bit late, but I just wanted to get some clarification. Your introductory statement suggests that you would want to abolish property taxes in Georgia.
We think property taxes are innately unfair. They're a capricious way of setting tax on personal property, which we said in our statement, we think erodes the American dream of home ownership and property ownership. And we think taxes on consumption and income are much fairer.
Along those lines, are you aware of any states that currently do not tax property?
I'm sure there's some. I don't know those states per se. Some counties in Georgia choose not to tax inventory. I do know that. Now,
with regard to competitiveness, you suggest that because of the small profit margins with retailers, 1% to 4%, that eliminating the inventory tax would certainly help them. How would adding a tax on services impact the competitive nature of service-oriented business vis-a-vis businesses in other neighboring states?
Representative Flood, I really didn't want to go there, but since you asked me, retailers have been collecting sales tax for years, and it's a burden and it's a chore, and most retailers get it right. Once in a while somebody's confused by it. We don't see anything unfair at all in having to say, okay, you're a retailer, you collect tax, you're an attorney, you don't collect tax. What's the fairness in that? So what's the difference between sales tax on sales or a tax on service? We think that both of them should be considered fairly and equally applied. So we'd be supportive of a tax on services, even though some of our members might pay additional money for services. The way the language has been developed, I think it addresses those concerns.
I was just really asking with regard to what kind of posture those service businesses would be in with competitors in other states if they were being taxed, attorneys, tax accountants, whatever other services, compared to other states.
If I've looked at the bill correctly, the resolution correctly, there are some limits to what taxes will be paid, and also some deductions that are made available. So I think those have been answered by the proposed legislation themselves. So
I believe it's $10,000 per.
Right, and I think that's manageable for most businesses in today's economy. at least most large businesses.
Let me make sure I get this correct. If I believe the bill speaks to, as a consumer, if I were to use legal services, then my tax to that one legal entity would be $10,000. If I use
No.
The way I understand it would be a max.
for all legal services.
4% of $10,000
That's
would be
what I understand.
$400.
And then one final question. With the expansion of taxes to services
Yes, sir.
and the number of service-oriented business in the state, what do you suspect the level of compliance? You mentioned that some retailers get it right, some may have some challenges. What do you think the compliance level for retailers would be today?
Well, retailers is probably 90, 95, 100%. We have some small foreign-owned businesses that aren't my members, by the way, but generally have a hard time understanding our tax code. And that was proven a couple years ago when you started collecting sales tax on fuel at the distributor and not the retailer. And those were the kind of issues we have. If you go any bona fide brick-and-mortar retailer that's been around for a while in Georgia, any of the newcomers even, they have sophisticated tax departments and handle this pretty well. Even small independent Ace Hardwares and True Value Hardwares don't have problems with this. So I think from a knowledge standpoint, they're going to handle it. From a willingness standpoint, I can't say how people are willing to pay taxes. That's an individual decision, a person makes for themselves, I think.
So do you think that you said that the retailers are currently at about 95% compliance?
At least. I don't have a figure. I know it's at least that high.
And you would suspect that, could you postulate what the service businesses' compliance rate would be?
I'd have no ability to postulate what they would comply. I'd imagine they're good citizens as well and want to do their civic duty, but I can't say that. I don't know that industry. I know my industry.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
22, who's that? Okay, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And John, appreciate your presentation, and I think you brought out some things probably we need to consider
Thank you, sir.
in this thing. I didn't hear you come out and say definitely, but is the association in support of the great plan?
We support the philosophy of reducing or removing property taxes. And I think that's as
pretty
far as
close.
I think as far as I can go and be perfectly fair to my people.
Okay, thank you.
I see no other questions. Mr. Eber, thank you
Thank
very
you, sir.
much for your testimony. Mr. Cecil Wilder, who is with the Georgia Music Educators Association, Executive Director. Good morning, Mr. Wilder. Welcome.
Good morning, sir.
I'm sorry, I should have turned that one off. My apologies.
Well, I'll turn them all up before I'm done. First of all, thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time this
Sure.
morning. It's
Glad to have you.
important to us and to our members. If you don't know about what we are and what we do, Georgia Music Educators Association represents the music teachers of the state of Georgia, 3,000 of them. Most of them are public school music teachers. And we sponsor continuing education activities for our teachers, but mainly we sponsor events for students who are involved in school music programs. If you have a child or a grandchild that's in a school music program in Georgia, they have most likely participated in some of our events. Of course, there's a lot of talk these days about the value of things like music and the fine arts and the well-rounded education of a child. I've got a stack on my desk that will tell you it's important. I've run into very few people who would say it's not important that we have these programs in our schools, but a lot of times we don't understand what it takes to have these programs and have them thrive, and we end up being the victims, if you will, of what we like to call collateral damage and unintended consequences, because legislation is passed, policy is passed at the DOE, and that's not something that somebody thought about. Is how is this going to affect these programs that are important, but they're not always seen as central to the curriculum because they're not tested. Most of the money for these programs comes from local funds, and they're already strapped in many school systems to provide this funding due to the austerity cuts, the fact that they don't get the money that they used to. And they have no choice in local school systems, in many cases, about what programs they want to look at when they have to save dollars, because if they're mandated by law or if they're tested, it's difficult to do that. And we end up being looked at, as do the other fine arts programs, things like foreign language in elementary schools and that sort of thing, for that. We're concerned about this legislation on two levels. One of them is on the basis of lack of self or loss of local control. in that since our programs are inherently locally funded, unless there is some enabling legislation that mandates these programs to be funded, as others are from the state level, we're concerned that the localities that want these programs want to have programs that go above and beyond in these areas for their kids. That they'll lose their ability to do that. I live in Sandy Springs in Fulton County. Fulton County values their fine arts programs. They've stepped up to the plate on several occasions to support them. We're concerned that they might not be able to do that if they lose any local control over how they generate funds for these programs. The other area of concern for us is the change from a property tax ad valorem tax base funding for education to a sales tax base for funding for education in general, in that even though there are people who find the principle of property tax or the degree of property tax onerous, they are at least reliable, and you can depend on the monies you get from them. I was born and grew up in Alabama, and Alabama has faced this problem forever. And theirs is largely sales tax based, and their school systems prosper or suffer based on the economy. They face something they call proration, and when they do, programs like ours, music programs, they're some of the first ones to suffer. So we are concerned on those two levels. What we would ask that you do is as you make your deliberations, to try to consider all aspects of the effects that this will have, since this legislation at this point does target school taxes primarily. Try to take into consideration some of the things that it might cause that you would not think about, that you would not want to happen, but they happened anyway. And since it is the legislation proposes a constitutional amendment, it looms large in that if it is passed, once it is passed, it will be difficult to correct those unintended consequences, and there'll be programs that are worthwhile to kids that will have suffered, and it will be hard to correct that damage. As a citizen, strictly as a tax-paying citizen, I pay very high property taxes in Fulton County and Sandy Springs. But I know what they're going to be, and I know how much I've paid at the end of the year. I don't know how much I pay in sales tax. I have no idea. I couldn't tell you. But I do know that I get a tax break on my income taxes from my property tax, and I have figured that into my household budget. If I'm going to pay the same amount of tax in sales and service tax that I was paying, or even close to the same amount of tax that I was paying in sales and service tax, then I'm going to end up paying more tax, because I don't get an IRS tax break on that. My home loan is relatively new, so my tax savings is substantial. So there are a lot of things about this, a lot of aspects of it that have to be thought about. I would just encourage you and ask you to consider all these things, and on behalf of our members to try to consider as best you can what effect this change, which is at a fundamental level in the way we raise tax revenues, might have on things that you would never think about. Our office is in Stockbridge. We have a website. If any of you have questions about any of this, we don't have representation at the DOE. There is no person representing the fine arts there, so you can't go there for advice necessarily. But I would stand ready to talk with any of you at any time if there's an aspect of this legislation or any legislation that you would be interested in how it might affect fine arts programs in Georgia. If you'll go to gmea.org, my contact information is there, and I will be more than happy to talk to you about it. I thank you for your time today, and I'm willing to answer any questions you have.
Excuse me. Any questions from the committee? We thank you for that testimony, and we certainly are willing to listen to any further analysis that you have. We realize that many people have not had an opportunity yet to even critically analyze a 40-page bill that we just really finalized 2 days ago. So this will be an ongoing process. So we're happy to hear from you again if you might come in. We appreciate your.
Thank you. I appreciate your time, and I will be monitoring this. And I can tell you if I see something that's going to affect us, if I don't hear from you, you'll hear from me.
We're certainly open for.
Thank you, sir.
Civil comment.
appreciate it. We appreciate it, and we do. I wanted to say that we do try to maintain a good working relationship with the decision makers. We are not a union. We are not a adversary. We are simply advocates for what's best for the kids of Georgia in school music programs. Thank you for your time.
We all agree there. Thank you very kindly.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Mr. Raleigh Morgan. My notes indicate that you are a Georgia taxpayer, Mr. Morgan. Welcome to this committee. Good morning. What say you?
Good morning, Chairman, and good morning, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of myself and many of my neighbors. As I stated, I'm just a Georgia taxpayer. I want to give you a short presentation of my property tax saga to basically give you the definition of why I'm a great plan supporter. I'm started paying property taxes at the age of 19, and I'm 50 now. So for the past 2 years, Cherokee County tax appraisers have raised my assessments 25, and this year 50%. I own 2 tracts next to one another. They're approximately 4 acres each. And one of the tracts my home is on. The other tract my parents' home is on. And currently my son lives in that. Altogether, these homes were built in 1978 and 1962. Dated homes. The property across the street from me is an executive large lot subdivision, 2 acre to 4 acre lots, very expensive houses. And it's sort of interesting when I got my bill and did research that my 2 tracts are told to me to be worth $41,900 per acre, and another tract is $51,300 per acre. These tracts across the street from me are valued at $32,000 per acre. It's interesting because they have amenities over there like underground utilities and natural gas, which I've been told on the road I own, I can't get natural gas. Not enough people live down that road, so I pay 4 times the price for propane. But I'm on unimproved property. This really isn't fair and equal in my book. So to make this, to add insult to injury, there's a tract of property that's 1.41 acres directly across the road from me at my corner. And it's for sale at $69,000 an acre. And that's $69,000 or $49,000 per acre. That's not too bad. The assessor's office has it valued at $75,000 per acre. This property's been for sale at $69,000 for 5 years and hasn't sold. So I was thinking about taking my assessments to court and spoke with 2 lawyers. And the problem is, number one, the cost is $25,000 to start, and I'm going to be fighting the state of Georgia. It seems the laws on the books give the assessor's office the right to do anything they wish to value the property. There's really nothing on the books to tell them they must follow one method or the other. They can follow just about anything they wish. The only case that I know where a taxpayer actually prevailed in the state of Georgia is the CSX Railroad case. The assessor's office didn't have anything to compare their property to when they almost tripled their tax assessments. If we can't do anything about this, I'm going to be forced to sell out and move. I can't continue to pay $5,000 a year to live on the property that I've lived on for 50 years. Neither I nor many of my neighbors were all in the same boat. My question is Georgia going to force me to leave for another state? In the southeast, Florida has the highest per capita, per person taxes, followed closely by North Carolina, and Georgia is a very close third behind North Carolina. Now, this is just the southeast. Texas is much lower than Georgia on the overall tax scheme. My neighbors, I have many old acquaintances, many neighbors that have lived in this community and worked in this community for a long period of time, and they are afraid. They're afraid these increased assessments will make it so they cannot afford to live on their fixed income. These are not rich people. They worked at local jobs. They have a retirement plan that supplements their Social Security. And they're worried they're going to have to decide between food, medicine, and living in their own home. Not to mention, what does this do to young people trying to get a start and finding out what their property taxes are actually going to cost them, making the decision that they can't afford it right now. Even though renting, they're also paying property taxes, but still, owning their own home, it puts it just a little further out for anyone who's trying to start out. I feel, and many, that these increased assessments are selective tax increases. I and my long-term neighbors are asking for help, and we need it now. And I'm looking forward to what you guys can do. Thank you very much. If there's any questions.
Would you be amenable to answer? I just want to caution the committee, we have 6 more testifiers before noon, so let's try to stick with maybe yes or no's. Who's 19? Representative Scott.
Mr. Morgan, thank you for coming today. I appreciate you being here. I had a couple questions. Did you say that you own unimproved acreage?
Yes, basically it's unimproved. I own a house on it. It's 4 acres, and I own my parents' house. It's right next to me, so they'll total it's approximately 8 acres. My son lives in that house. It's not something that is in a subdivision. It's basically what the assessor's office considers rural property. Although my zoning and the executive subdivision across the street from me, zoning is exactly the same. It's AG, agricultural. They consider them as a residential and me rural. So.
Mr. Morgan, do you own any other property? And I don't know.
No, that's it. That's all I own is those 2 tracts.
Well, let me just ask you this. If the property taxes could be raised by referendum on those unimproved acres while exempting your homestead, but those unimproved acres could be raised over and over again, would that give you concern?
What concerns me is when I see the bottom line every year and it's going up. That's what concerns me and many of my neighbors. Mm-hmm. I dove into Georgia Code 48-5, which is the property assessment, and found that it really is an excellent cure for insomnia. Mm. But looking at it,
you think we feel?
Well, you guys wrote it, so.
Mr. Morgan, thank you for your time. I appreciate that. I thought maybe you might have some additional acreage, but possibly when we have someone else that has more acreage, that's a question I'd like to pose to them.
Okay,
yeah, I can't help you with it.
Number 5, who's that? Senator Scott.
I want to thank you also for taking the time to come up here, and I want to make sure I understand. You said that your assessments went up 25 to 50%.
My assessment went up in 2005, 25%, and 2006 for 50%. Let me make one small note. The assessments on this executive subdivision is across the street from me, and many around the area the same way. They haven't went up since, on the land value alone now, they haven't went up since 2001. They haven't been reassessed as far as property value going up. Now, this is property. This is land.
Right.
It shouldn't be that much difference.
Did the county and the school board roll back the millage after those assessments, or in other words, did the tax go up as much as the assessments did, or was there a rollback?
The county, and you really have to see how this has played out. The county, for the past 7 years, has raised the millage rate once, which, the school board has raised it 6 times. Now, when you're talking about millage rate, and you're talking about they take the total and say, well, we're not going to raise the millage rate this year. They take the total assessment. But this, and I watched this play out in our local papers. Our chief assessor basically said, well, the increased assessments were really only in this certain area of the county this year. Well, that area, the area that I live in, saw massive increases in your assessments. What happened to our tax bill? Regardless if you raised or lowered or kept the millage rate the same, our tax bill went up a lot. And other areas may have went down, but how much?
They're supposed to roll the millage back when they do the reassessments.
They do, and they did roll it back to make it, quote, revenue neutral, but that's not what we're seeing.
it's technically, I think, revenue neutral on the whole, but any particular taxpayer could see a significant rate increase, which is.
And we were targeted in the southeastern portion of Cherokee County, or the far eastern portion of Cherokee County, really saw a massive increase this year, and a pretty good increase the year before.
Are they in this? So your increases have been on net tax have been in the same range as your assessment increases?
Well, I look at total. How much do I write a check for the county?
Right. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, it's been up
by the same 25% and then 50%.
25%, then 50% again this year.
All right. Thank you. That was my question. Okay. Assessments versus net tax.
Thank you.
Net tax is really killing us.
29, who's that? Representative Martin.
Appreciate the gentleman coming down. Real brief in the interest of time, you mentioned you went to retain an attorney, and it was going to be 20. Your representation was you thought it was going to be $25,000. Did you avail yourself of going to the Board of Assessors or board? Did you write back and say I don't agree? And did you go to the Board of Equalization? Because I live in Fulton County, and I too have to visit with them on every third year to do that. But I mean, constitutionally, if you show them one property that's equivalent to yours, that's assessed lower than yours, you have a constitutional basis on which to lower your assessment. That's just a law, law in Georgia. I'm concerned, I guess, that Cherokee County is not giving you the opportunity other than spending $25,000 to talk to them about your tax bill. And that's not really what's in front of this committee, so I won't belabor the point. But did you get an opportunity to talk with them?
Yes, I did. I did appeal, and I did go to the appeal, and they compared me with raw land, raw property that didn't have a house on it, wasn't anything. It wasn't an existing house or anything, and I lost. And I have my presentation. I'd be happy to let you see it.
I'll take you up on that one, for a moment if you don't mind sharing it with me.
I do not mind sharing it with you at all.
Thank you. 20, is that Representative Royal? Chairman Royal.
Mr. Morgan, the growth around your area, is it residential or is any of it retail or?
It is mostly residential. There's very little retail. We finally got a public store within 10 miles of my home within the past 5 years, but it's mainly residential growth that you're seeing out there, and it's mainly large lot subdivisions. Cherokee County has it set up such that in that end of the county it's very difficult to get a rezoning to have smaller homes for starter homes or anything like that. So they've targeted that area. But the thing is your long-term residents are getting killed by it.
Are you familiar with conservation use?
I am, and was told by the county that I don't have 10 acres. And
well, you're not eligible for the transitional residential portion of it?
I've taken a look at that. There are some things about that I'm really not fond of, but that's relatively new looking at it in Cherokee County. But
you may want to check that out. It could save you some dollars.
I have checked it out, but there are some restrictions on that. I mean, I do have one other child that might want to build a house, and that would pretty much kill that. I have to tell them, well, sorry, my son, I can put him in a house, but my daughter, I have to tell her, sorry, you got to go somewhere else. I couldn't do that to them.
Well, that provision was put in the law for areas that were fast growing so that you could find ad valorem tax relief.
Again, I've looked at it briefly.
Okay, I'd check it again.
There's some restrictions that I'm not real fond of.
Anything further? Thank Mr. Morgan, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Committee.
Have a nice day. Mr. Howard, please forgive my pronunciation, Wachstetter, Wastetter. Welcome, good morning, and please clarify my pronunciation of your name.
100% correct. My name is, if you call me Howard, though, you don't know who I am. I'm Buzz Wachstetter. I'm a city commissioner from Rome. And Mr. Chairman and members, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this morning. I'll try and be as brief as I can because I know you have other witnesses to come in. I don't think there's anyone within the state of Georgia who doesn't want their taxes either cut or eliminated. And as a property owner, I guess I fit into that too, but as an elected official of what some people call the government closest to the people, which is the cities, the municipalities, we have to look at revenue, and we have to look at sources of revenue, and we have to look at the total picture a little differently in Rome, because we do have an independent school system. Although they do have their own Board of Education, we do approve their budget, we do set the millage, and we do collect the taxes. So we are concerned about our school system too. I think what you're trying to do in the big picture is an admirable thing. You're trying to look at a way to make taxes equitable. You're trying to make a way so that you can fund government the best way you can. What our feeling is that we need a plan that has a lot of deep, detailed study. As I just heard a moment ago, you just finished 2 days ago on a bill that will be debated at some time on the floor of the House and go over to the Senate, or it'll be vice versa, depending on the bill. That we feel that it would be in the best interest of all citizens and all governments of Georgia that the cities, the counties, the boards of education, that you create a really blue ribbon commission of city people, of county people, of business people, of education people from all segments of Georgia. And I was talking to someone earlier. I said, some of you that are old enough to remember back when Carl Sanders was governor, and he used to have the Sibley Commission, and they used to come up with these really deep, in-depth blue ribbon reports and things. And we feel that this would be a good step. Another good step would be to look at your current sources of income and see what Georgia is missing. We've been told that in our local sales tax, our sales taxes collected in Georgia, that about 20%, the figure we've been given, about 20% statewide is really never collected. We support fully the state getting behind the consortium of other states and working with the federal government to collect sales tax on internet sales. The information I have that last year in Georgia alone, that some companies that voluntarily pay into the state of Georgia paid $88,958,093 in 2007 fiscal year. $88,950,000 voluntarily. Now, guess what we're not collecting? If you look at a University of Tennessee study, they're saying on the low end it could be $722.9 million, and on the high end, $1.130 billion with a B of taxes, sales taxes generated by e-commerce in the year 2008. Local merchants were happy if they got 2%, 2.6%, something like that in Christmas sales, while the increases purported to internet sales were 20%. We believe in leveling the playing field. It is your local merchant that is supporting local education. It's your local merchant that's supporting your local government. So we need to level that field, and one way would be for you as members of the General Assembly to work with other states and with our federal legislators to start collecting the money that is due us. Now, if you look at that much money, there's a lot of things that Georgia can do with our roads, with education, with everything else. That is a tremendous amount of money. And I think it's a loophole that needs to be closed. We're concerned about uncollected taxes. We're concerned about tax collection in general because there is no way for us to check. In the city of Rome, our last 3 months of local option sales tax, the lost tax, has been down. Ours was going down when the state was showing big increases. And we were saying, how could this be? But there's no point of sale reporting by the Revenue Department. We couldn't even see what our taxes are. We have to take somebody's word for it. And we can't get in there and reconstruct and try and prove that this is wrong. So this is one of the things that the cities end up with. Let me say this, too, as an elected official, that in 6 years, I'm starting my 7th year, as an elected official, I have never had one person call me and say, I want to talk to you because my taxes are too high. Believe it or not. We hold, by law, a number of public hearings on our budget and when we set the millage. I can tell you in the last 6 years, and I think I was talking to our city manager in the last 12, 14 years, no one has ever shown up to complain about our tax millage or our city budget. But what we do get complaints about is my street is not fixed. I have a problem with the police department. I want to talk to you about water and sewer and all these other things. And it always comes out, Mr. Chairman, it says, I pay my taxes and I want the service. And I think that's what most of the citizens of Georgia say. I pay my taxes, I want the service. And they're dependent on us, the local governments, to provide those services. And plans like the Great Plan take a lot of that opportunity away from us. I can tell you that the City of Rome, that Floyd County's Board of Commissioners, that the City of Rome Board of Education, and I also believe Floyd County Board of Education are opposed to the plan. We feel that there can be some meaningful tax reform, but the tax reform needs to come after careful, deliberate study by a diverse group that represents the people of Georgia, the business of Georgia, the government of Georgia, so that everyone can come to the table and come away united, because working together does work. And if you do it that way, I don't see, Mr. Chairman, that you'll have any problems whatsoever. Thank you for the opportunity of appearing before you. I hope during this session you will support some type of action so that we can get together and work on those internet sales and start bringing some of that money back to the state. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Would you take a question, Representative Flood?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wachstatter, thank you for your testimony.
Yes,
I just wanted to get some additional clarification. You mentioned that there's an estimate of somewhere around 20% of taxes that are uncollected.
That's the information that's given to me.
What are the sources of that uncollected tax? Is it sales tax? Is it
sales tax?
Now, does that include the 700 to 1.2 billion in internet sales from the universities? So, in addition to the 20% that's uncollected, there's still an additional 700 to 1.2 billion in internet sales. Is that a national number or a state number?
That's the state number that this University of Tennessee report estimates for 2008 on e-commerce.
20% of what we, so just again so I understand, the 20% number would be if we if we collect $5 billion now, right? Yes. 20% of that would be $1 billion in uncollected taxes.
That is unreported. And that's not e-commerce.
Okay, thank you very much.
There's a lot of money out there.
I'm real confused. Somebody in Tennessee knows all about our sales taxes, or is that what you're saying? And their estimate of our e-commerce is 20%?
I presume they're basing it on the reports that they get from many of the major vendors. A lot of the major vendors, like I think it's Target and some of the others, although they do have a nexus here, but some of the others that do voluntarily comply, that they can extrapolate from things like that how much the actual sales were, and this is what they're projecting. I've heard these figures for the last 3-4 years, similar figures from different sources, and that's why our city has been pushing, and through the Georgia Municipal Association been pushing that some type of action so that the state will join that consortium so that we can start grabbing this tax.
Okay. We thank you. I see no other questions. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Mr. Bill Lewis with the city of Dahlonega. Did you bring any gold with you?
Yes, sir. I got a truckload out back.
Welcome, Bill. Good morning.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to visit with you all this morning. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to share a specific example of how our city's sole dependency on sales tax revenues would have prevented or at best seriously impaired my city's ability to secure interim financing for a $22 million water treatment project that we have currently in process. Permanent financing for these kinds of projects, either through the issuance of revenue bonds or through GFA, cannot be secured until preliminary engineering and design is completed and the project is ready to go to bid. In Dahloneg's case, this preliminary work was estimated to cost $1.3 million. Excuse me, $1,300,000. Money the city did not have and therefore had to borrow from a local bank. To accomplish this, we used a method commonly used by cities called a TAN, or a tax anticipation note. State law permits cities and counties to borrow against anticipated tax revenues. The lender accepts the pledge of the city's anticipated tax collection to ensure the loan is paid. The lender protects itself by including language in the loan agreement that requires the city to increase property taxes sufficient to cover any revenue shortfalls. Without the stable property tax and the city's ability to adjust it if needed, we could not have secured the interim financing needed for this project. It's my understanding that under the Senate component of this plan, it would be very difficult for us to have gotten this loan because of the cap on tax revenues. No bank is going to give a loan to a city based on a referendum passing or not. We can't wait 6 months to a year to get the money in order to start the project. As we all know too well, the sales tax is linked to the economy. During good economic times, sales tax collections will be good. On the other hand, when the economy is weak, sales taxes are down. I wish I could say that there is a corresponding decrease in the demand for city services during poor economic times, but unfortunately that's not the case. In fact, during tough economic times, citizens expect more from their government, both local and state. Georgia is a growing state. The stress from the demands for more transportation and environmental infrastructure needs are tremendous. Our citizens are coming from areas that have provided high levels of service, and they bring with them the expectation for those same levels of service to be provided in our community. The most effective and efficient method to provide these services is to give our cities the resources they need to do the job and let the citizens, through their elected bodies, determine the needs and service levels for the community. As a local government official, I remain committed to the proposition that our citizens are in the best position to know the needs of their communities. They elect qualified and dedicated officials to provide the services and the infrastructure they need. Without a stable and predictable revenue source, it would be difficult to plan for next year, let alone do any long-range planning. The current tax system, while not perfect, provides the best means for cities to meet their needs. For my city, I ask that you seriously consider the consequences of this plan. Just because it sounds good doesn't mean it is good. We have had some serious concerns, as was mentioned by the previous speaker, over the last few years as a municipal organization about our ability to accurately collect and remit sales taxes to cities and counties across the state. You heard the figure of approximately 20% uncollected sales taxes. We have seen the same thing that the city of Rome and other cities have seen in the past. Inconsistent and unexplained sales tax collections, drops and rises, while throughout the rest of the state, the economy seems to be doing well. I would also ask that you consider the effect of a sales tax increase across the state and how it might affect cities and counties' ability to pass a SPLOST locally. SPLOST are critical to cities and counties providing infrastructure needs within the community. And I will close by saying that we understand and appreciate the awesome responsibility that each of you has as members of this body. And we know that it is a responsibility that you don't take lightly. And we know you will give this issue the careful scrutiny it deserves and ultimately do what's in the best interest of all Georgians. And thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Would you take one question from a member? 15, who's that?
Mr. Chairman. The question I had, I've asked yesterday too, and you were stating there that you thought that East Splost, and Lost may be hard to pass. Do you think that's because the folks don't want to collect it, the folks that are in the service community that are going to be taxed under this plan don't want to collect it over time, or do you feel like, can you explain yourself on that?
Well, I think when it comes to taxes, people don't look at whether it's a local tax or a state tax. They look at the bottom line and what's coming out of their pocketbook. And if another 1% sales tax is added to the existing tax base, that's what the taxpayer looks at. It's not, and then the city and the county come along on top of that for a 1% local options or a SPLOST, special purpose local options sales tax. I just think it would probably interfere with the cities and counties to be able to encourage their constituency to pass that.
A follow-up. You understand now that the SPLOST is not going to affect services. It's just the 4 cents on the dollar. The state tax is all as far as this bill is now.
Right, I understand that.
But it will affect food and those kind of things. That's just the question that I had. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Representative Tumlin, one more question.
Yes, sir, Mr. Lewis. You mentioned, I guess, the full faith and credit, like on a bond or a TAN.
Right.
But when you put that in a lender's provision, it mainly is dealing with just the millage, not necessarily assessment in it. Does it?
It's not dealing with the assessment. It's dealing with the millage. My concern was the revenue cap issue. And if we had a revenue cap, as what I understand is provision in the constitutional amendment that's in the Senate version of this thing, if you had a revenue cap, then I think it would make it very difficult for cities to get interim financing through tax anticipation notes.
Thank you.
Especially if you had to hold a referendum.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis, for your testimony. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Mr. Ken Turner, City of Gordon. Mayor of the City of Gordon. Welcome, Ken. Good to have you. And good morning. You too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak for a moment, and for the members of the committee, and thank you for giving us the time. And to give a short background, if you don't mind, just to let you know I'm not a professional person who is involved in the staff, and I'm not a technical tax expert either. I'm a mayor for the past 6 years of the City of Gordon, small town. I work full-time at it for $300 a month, and I'm happy about that. That's plenty of money for me because I'm retired, and I'm fortunate enough that I'm okay. I've served 8 years as a county commissioner and chair, so I've had that background. I've been on city council for a number of years. So 22 to 24 years of service, so to speak, that I've given, and I'm happy to give it. We'll continue to give it. And I guess when I first heard about the great plan, so to speak, the tax plan, and I've followed it from its inception, or at least as far as I know of it, it's the inception, I was happy about it because as a county commissioner and as a city council and mayor, we've advocated and lobbied for a tax reform for some 18 years that I'm personally aware of. We would continue to lobby for tax reform. We sorely need it. I'm a member and have been for a long time of a property owners association who think that our property taxes are too high and need to be revamped and some adjustments need to be made. We still hold that position. I still hold that position. And when I first heard of this, it sounded great in a way because it was going to do away with property taxes. Gordon is in an economically depressed area. We have a major industry which contribute about 50% of the taxes to our area, and they are depressed, have been for a few years now. Our city during the 80s did well and did well in the very early 90s from an economic standpoint, and we built up a reserve that for the past 8 years we've had to rely on in order to carry us through this. This past year is the first break-even year we've had from a cash flow standpoint in 8 years. So maybe we're beginning to turn it around a bit. So when I first heard of this, it sounded great because I sat down and did as best I could based on how the bill was originally written. And I realized this bill, this resolution is a moving target. So I don't know all the ramifications of it today. But in the beginning, when I sat down and figured out, well, if we're going to do away some exemptions, we're going to collect more here on this sales tax. If they do away with, and if they collect all the property tax, all the taxes that are due, surely they're going to do that. They're going to have to revamp Revenue Department if they're going to add more burden to them. Hopefully they'll do that. If so, we'll yield more taxes from that. And so when I figured it all out and we do away with the property taxes, we're going to have something like a 20 to 25% net increase in income. Then I read the fine print. We don't get to keep the net income. The state gets it. Sorry, that just doesn't go well with me, and doesn't go well with our property owners and our taxpayers. I also had some concern once I thought it out even further that sales tax is a regressive tax whether we like to say so or not. There's some reasons it depends on your philosophy that we ought to do more sales tax, and there's some on another that we should do even less. But it puts a burden on us. We already are fighting with cuts in mental health services and health services in our community that we're having to make up the differences from somewhere. Some of it's coming from sales tax, some of it's coming from property taxes. If we put burdens on our people that need more money and they're going to have to pay more money in sales tax, then that burden's going to reflect back on us. We're going to have to pick up some of the health costs and some of the mental health costs, and we're going to have other social problems at the local level we're going to have to deal with because of the lack of money. The worst thing the state's ever done is put the state lottery in. That probably put a tax on poor people at a level that the state will never overcome in terms of offsetting social changes that occurred. We've got 29% of every dollar coming back in the school system. That's not that great in my opinion. I also would like, Mr. Chairman, to advocate for this because you're close enough to us that I can use you as an advocate if you don't mind. I would like to house the industry that's going to be involved with taking all the questions and I would say applications for return of grocery sales tax. That's going to be a bureaucracy the state's never seen before. That we're going to charge sales tax on groceries, but if you send in the right paperwork at the right time, we're going to return it to you?
Paperwork will be something called a tax return, which we think is a good thing that a lot of people have been avoiding filing, and think we'll be able to collect a lot of bad taxes, but apparently you disagree.
It will be to a population of people that have a difficult time with that already. But Mr. Chairman, and I understand that, and I understand the purpose behind it. But with that, I would say that the thing that bothers me the most, if we could, is that the money is going to come to Atlanta. Atlanta's going to decide how to redistribute it. In effect, that's changing a form of government, as far as I'm concerned. We're going to be moving away from representative government when we make that move. That's a major, major move. If you're going to put the sales tax on, do away with property tax, I could probably support that 100% if the local entities are going to keep that sales tax increase. But that's not the case. I suspect if you put that piece on the bill, the author of the bill would want to withdraw it. So it's the net effect to me, as far as I'm concerned, is going to be a tax increase, and it'll be a major tax increase. And it'll be a tax increase that's on sales that are not noticeable, so to speak. With that, I strongly feel that this bill cannot be fixed. I think this bill ought to be scuttled and kicked out and thrown away and start over with tax reform. I know we've made some efforts, and I appreciate the efforts that all of you have made, many of you have made over the last months trying to mold this thing and make something out of it. I don't think it can. I just think it needs to go away. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. I see no questions. Thank you very much for your input, and if you have more to add later, we're glad to hear that as well. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have actually three more sets of folks that I need to apologize to, that if I could prevail upon you, Mr. McWilliams, Mr. Clay, and/or Ms. Schultz, and Mr. Mueller, who I think is going to be here with us anyway, hopefully, if I could move y'all on the other side of lunch. We do have reason to believe that our 2 o'clock author of the bill may not be here on time for other commitments, so I think we're going to have plenty of time on the other side of the lunch hour. So with that, committee members, we'll break for lunch, but I ask that you be back here sharp at 1:15 if you can to review deliberations. I will announce if there's anybody here specifically to hear from Speaker Richardson. I'm not sure, nor have I been advised yet exactly what time we can expect his arrival. I suspect it may be late or delayed because he was involved in a trial, and sometimes those circumstances confront us that we're unable to control, and I think he's under that. So as soon as we get word when we can expect him, we'll let everybody know that might be here for that reason. Like to know if anybody in the committee needs to do anything before we start back on the testimony. Okay, we'd like to hear from our friends with the Georgia Forestry Association, and I appreciate their indulgence. They were actually scheduled this morning, and they stayed over and probably had to cancel some other appointments. Good afternoon, Mr. Williams, and if you would introduce your associate. And
I'll be glad to, Mr. Chairman, and I don't know whether it's best to be the last thing between you and lunch or the first thing after you've had a big lunch, but regardless, what we've got to say is important, depending on no matter what side of lunch it takes place on. Chairman O'Neill, members of the committee, on behalf of Georgia's forestry community and one of the state's most valuable economic and environmental resources, her private forests, I thank you for the opportunity to speak briefly with you today on the subject of ad valorem tax reform and the impact that it is having on our private forests. My name is Steve McWilliams. I am privileged to serve as the Executive Vice President of the Georgia Forestry Association. And I have with me today Mr. Blake Sullivan, a past president of the Georgia Forestry Association, a forest landowner himself from Macon, Georgia. And when I am done with the speakers, with the chairman's permission, Mr. Sullivan will have some comments, and then we'll both entertain as many questions as you allow time for. Before I launch into prepared remarks, there are a couple of things that I would like to say. And first of all, that in the Georgia forestry community, I have to say that the Speaker and the House leadership that signed their names to H.R. 900 are pretty much considered heroes because you have taken what we see as a very sick patient and put it on a table and dissected it to find out how we might make that patient better. What the Speaker has done is a very, very bold move. And in order to make major changes in tax policy or any other type of policy, sometimes it takes people that are willing to take a risk. And we are very, very indebted to him and the leadership that has supported him in this effort. Secondly, I would like to say that our testimony today is somewhat of a continuation of deliberations that have taken place over the past 2 or 3 years on this subject, in that in 2005 a joint Future of Forestry Legislative Study Committee co-chaired by Senator Ross Tolleson and Representative Lynn Smith, of that study committee's 9 recommendations, at the end of their hearings, the very top recommendation was that the state examine its ad valorem property tax system with respect to forest land and the future of forest land in this state. Following that, I believe the Governor's Land Conservation Council, as a part of its final report to the Governor and to the legislature, acknowledged that the current ad valorem tax system was a disincentive to the continuation of growing trees by private landowners in the state of Georgia. So we feel like what we're talking about today is not a new idea, it's not a new subject, and we appreciate this forum. My remarks will be fairly brief, though if there's any supporting data that you need, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we're pleased to provide as much background material to support our observations and assertions as you feel necessary. Today in Georgia, ad valorem taxes levied on private forests are reaching levels that are forcing many forest landowners to consider selling out or converting their land to non-forest uses. This is particularly true of large, contiguous forested tracts. As a result, local communities throughout the state are at risk of losing the forests that provide innumerable environmental and economic benefits. Georgia is blessed with an invaluable asset. It's 24 million acres of privately owned timberlands. Remarkably, in spite of our state's explosive growth, we have managed to maintain the largest acreage of private forests of any state in the country. These forests support a $27 billion per year forest products industry in Georgia and are the economic lifeblood of many rural areas of our state. They also provide our citizens, at no cost I might add, with incalculable conservation and environmental benefits. Approximately 17 years ago, concerned about Georgia's forestry future, the legislature adopted and voters statewide approved a preferential tax treatment for forest land, referred to as Conservation Use Valuation Assessment, or CUVA for short. Unfortunately, the application of CUVA is available only to private, non-industrial forest landowners and only to a maximum of 2,000 acres. As you are probably aware, this conservation use tax classification requires a covenant that prohibits the property from being developed for 10 years, imposing stiff penalties if that covenant is breached. Every state in the country has some type of agricultural or forest land tax classification, which recognizes the value of these land uses to a community and which attempts to levy taxes on property based on its actual use. Georgia's conservation use tax classification is far more restrictive than any other state in the South, limiting acreage and restricting ownership type. Also in Georgia, unlike our southern counterparts, a severance tax must be paid on the value of timber when it is harvested at 100% of fair market value. Examples of dramatic increases in local property taxes are legion, as indicated by a quick survey of tree farmers across the state. For example, according to one Georgia Forestry Association member with forest land in a number of counties, assessed values for timberlands in Jefferson County, for example, increased by 47% in 2007 alone. In Washington County, assessed values increased by 167% since 2001. In McDuffie County, assessed values have increased by 260% since 1998. And in Warren County, assessed values increased by 120% in 2006 alone. If you're looking and following the testimony that was in your packet, I have on page 3 included 2 charts that I'm not going to speak to necessarily, but that I will let you look at later just to give you an example. In the first chart of a state-by-state tax rate comparison that was provided to me by one of my members to demonstrate to you, or illustrate to you rather, the difference in the levels of ad valorem property tax on forest land in Georgia versus other states. I want to point out to you, because your copies were not done on a color copier, that the Georgia figure of $8.16 includes the timber tax that was paid on the timber in Georgia. The second chart simply will show you an example from yet another landowner of a 6-year comparison of tax comparison on land that was, I think, in four different counties. This is sort of a compilation of taxes that this company paid, and you can see at the bottom that in 5 years there has been a dramatic increase in in ad valorem taxes paid on forest land. Depending on what metric you use for measurement, forestry-related manufacturing in this state is the first or second largest industry, an industry that is fed by trees from healthy forests managed year after year by large and small forest landowners. You might say that forestry is Georgia's goose that for decades has laid one golden egg right after another. Jobs, community support, business leadership, outdoor recreation, environmental protection, the list goes on. And with respect to environmental protection, I hope that you saw the Forestry Association's piece in the AJC yesterday on the editorial page where we talked about the relationship between forests and water. Very timely, we thought, considering that our Water Council adopted its water plan yesterday. If you did not see that, I would encourage you to take a look at that. It's an interesting and I think important perspective. And now we're looking at Georgia to be a leader in another emerging industry, and that is cellulosic ethanol production. One very obvious and demonstrable force on forest owners is the unfair balance of services in return for taxes paid. Studies show that for every dollar in ad valorem tax generated by Georgia's timberlands, those same lands receive less than 50% in services, 50 cents in services in return. Forest land, however, is not a big consumer of public education, of water and sewer, of trash collection, of EMS service, or many other services that are provided locally to homeowners and business owners by the local taxing jurisdictions. Yet the owners of forest land pay, through their property taxes, for those services at the same rate as those who receive far more in services. And we feel that this is truly an unfair tax burden on forest owners. And ultimately, it is harmful to the future of Georgia as a major forestry state. I know that everyone's definition of a fair tax is different. It's most often considered the most fair tax if the one defining it is not the one paying it. But surely we've not abandoned totally our desire to legislate as fairly as possible for all Georgia constituencies. I know also that the major focus of ad valorem tax reform is on residential taxpayers and not on agricultural forest land. The political benefits of this are obvious. After all, trees don't vote and homeowners do. I would add here that we are very aware and appreciative that the Speaker is committed to this being just the first step in his overall plan to try to eliminate property taxes totally in the state of Georgia. And we appreciate that very much. Unquestionably, Georgia's current property tax system is quite at odds with the state's land conservation policy that calls for more and more undeveloped land to be set aside as green space. On the one hand, we say that because of the numerous benefits they provide to society, we want to conserve our forests and save them from development. But at the same time, we persist with tax policy that increasingly threatens to force conversion of forests to other uses and to fragment large, undeveloped landscapes. We believe that it's time for Georgia to do the right thing, to implement a property tax system that encourages landowners to continue to grow trees rather than penalizing them for doing so. If Georgia wants eventually to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs, we currently have the perfect property tax system to do just that. If, on the other hand, Georgia wants to maintain green space, high-quality water supply, clean air, wildlife diversity, outdoor recreation, natural beauty, and the list goes on, we will change a tax system that allows unimproved forested land to be taxed at levels that essentially represent a highest and best use taxation. I thank you for your time and attention, and if it would be all right with the chairman, I'd like to ask Mr. Sullivan, who is a landowner and who has very recent experience with the subject at hand, to address the committee for a moment.
Mr. Sullivan, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Blake Sullivan. I'm a third-generation forest landowner and will likely be the last. I'm here today before you because I've been working on the ad valorem tax policy in the state now since the early 1990s when we got CUBA passed, and realized that the state of Georgia has in fact a tax policy that is misdirected and misguided as far as ad valorem taxes go. Since we all just got through eating lunch, what I'd like to do is not ask you to close your eyes, but I would like for you to Imagine with me just a minute that driving from here at the Capitol today to Valdosta, Columbus, or Savannah, can you imagine a scenario in the state of Georgia where there would be no trees for miles and miles and miles as you rode down the road between any of those towns? I bet you can't imagine that. In fact, I can't either. But let me tell you that as recently as less than 90 years ago in the state of Georgia, that was an absolute and unequivocal fact. See, Georgia at the time was an agricultural society, and cotton was king. And somewhere between 1910 and 1920, the agricultural community collapsed. And that was because of cotton prices going down, and people had land on which they could do nothing with it. Most of our national forests that we have in the state of Georgia today were formed during this time because nobody wanted the land. And I'm going to tell you what caused that was a collapse in farm prices. But let me tell you this, that it is not hard for me to imagine that that scenario could not take place again, where you can drive for miles and miles and miles across the state of Georgia and never see a tree. See, I will tell you that Georgia's ad valorem tax policy is driving a stake in the heart of forestry as we speak. In fact, I'll even be so bold to say that the state of Georgia is the largest land clearing company that we have in the state because of the policies that we have. We say on one hand that we want to protect green space, and we set aside state money to do that, and we think the government owning land is a good thing. But there are hundreds and thousands of people just like me who are in the state of Georgia who would gladly do this type of work if only we were allowed and had the chance to do so. And I will tell you today that we can't. I've submitted to you a set of written comments, and I won't go over those, but I would like to share with you the example that I have in there from a little county called Webster, located in the southwest part of the state of Georgia. Webster County is one of the poorest counties in this state. Not a whole lot of industry there. In fact, it's supported completely by agriculture and forestry for the most part. There are less than 2,300 people that live in that county. This year, when I got my property tax bills, I found that they had gone up by 52% in that county alone. 44% of that went to the school system, and 8% of that went to the government. And now I'm paying $13.50 an acre on property taxes, of which I have probably little or no services at all that come from the county or from the school system. And because of that, and this is in a county that does not have much development, if any at all, and because of that, I can't grow enough trees fast enough at the prices necessary just to pay the taxes. And so I'm going to sit here to you today and say, you know what? I'm going to probably be the last forester in my family, last landowner in my family, simply because the state of Georgia is putting me out of business. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time. Thank you, committee, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if you can.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. McWilliams, and there are some questions, if you all don't mind. 16, who's that? Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. McWilliams, I appreciate y'all coming to us today and talking to us. I'm from South Georgia as well and farm, so I understand exactly what you're talking about, and hopefully with our expert down here, Chairman Royal on Cuba, we can work on that if we can't get anything else done to expand that. Mr. McWilliams, I want to ask you a question just to clarify something for me. On the chart here where Georgia's at $8.16. You've got that includes the timber tax that was already paid. Do these other states either not charge the timber tax, or is it not figured in there?
They do not have a severance tax.
They do not. Okay. All right. And now, I guess one more follow-up question, Mr. Chairman.
Please, feel free.
This is outside of Cuba, right? This $8.16, that's land that's outside of Cuba.
That is correct.
Okay.
And let me also say that it would have been very easy to provide you with charts that would have shown that $8.16 at $13, at $15, and even $18. We have contiguous tracts of timber in Georgia and in Florida, where in Florida, without a severance tax, the tax is $2.50 an acre, and right across the line, we're paying $15 and $16 an acre.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
19, who's 19? Oh, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McWilliams, I just out of curiosity, have you had time to review the current legislation that we have before us, the H.R. 900 as well as the companion legislation?
Only very quickly.
In its present form, how does it impact timber? I mean, just quickly, just briefly.
Well, our concern, main concern we would have in its current form is that the tax reform is applying only to residential taxpayers. And if ad valorem tax is going to continue to be allowed and levied on other types of property, then one concern would be that that opens us up for even more substantial increases, perhaps, to try to recoup what certain local governing authorities might feel like, or taxing authorities might feel like they've lost. So from that standpoint, it doesn't treat every taxpayer equally, I guess. So that would be a concern.
Thank you, Mr. McWilliams. That was you answered my question clearly. Thank you very much.
22.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Steve and Mr. Sullivan. I'm from North Georgia, but I see the same thing you're talking about, and it really concerns me. And I just want to ask you, we've had several sell-offs by the timber companies in Whitfield County and that area up there because of this problem of property tax and being able to become profitable. Can you estimate, and I know this has been statewide, how many thousands of acres, and these things are just about bought up and clear-cut right off the bat, how many thousands of acres have been sold because of this property tax problem?
I cannot answer that specifically. We are working with the University of Georgia now to get those kinds of numbers. I can tell you that there are, or for example, International Paper sold 600,000 acres here within the past 2 years, and their motivation was not primarily a property tax, issue. I'm sure that it probably factored in. But if you take somebody like Weyerhaeuser, who's one of the first to divest itself of its timberlands here in Georgia, approximately 325,000 acres. Weyerhaeuser could have sold land in Arkansas. They could have sold land in Alabama, several other locations. All other things being equal, but they chose to do so in Georgia. And they will tell you, and they have told me, that a part of that was that, figuring in the tax situation in Georgia, it just, that made it the best business decision for them in terms of selling that land and getting cash and that sort of thing. Not every acre that's sold is because of property taxes. I'm not here to tell you that, but I'm here to tell you that there is a trend in this state that, and maybe not even in our lifetime, we'll turn around and notice, boy, I wish we'd done something back in 2008. But this trend, unless something is done, is going to continue. It's going to exacerbate the problem. Forest lands are going to disappear, and our children or our grandchildren and their children are going to be looking at quite a different state than we're looking at right now. So, I know we think in much shorter cycles than what you need to think in when you're in the forestry business. But that is definitely what's happening and what will happen to this state if something's not done.
I know Bowater up there has sold off, and their main reason is that they could not make a profit, and they had to sell it and get out. So, and that thousands of acres they sold.
Okay.
Thank you.
Representative Flood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. McWilliams. Do you have a sense of how much the timber or forestry industry paid in ad valorem property taxes the last year, 2 years? A feeling for how much that is.
I probably have that, Representative Flood, but I don't want to try to recall. I will get that information to you pretty quickly, but I wouldn't want to throw a figure that I might estimate out. I'd rather you have the exact figure, but I don't have it with me.
You referenced in your materials that you felt, and I agree with you, that we certainly need to address tax reform, property tax reform in Georgia. You showed an $8.16 tax rate per acre, and although that could have been higher, depending on the specific scenario, what would you propose or suggest would be a fair rate for the timber industry? What should that number be?
Well, I'm going to defer to Mr. Sullivan on this, but I will tell you that generally speaking, when you get up around $700, $800 an acre on an acre of timber, and keep in mind here, when we talk about this ad valorem tax, we're talking about the dirt. We're not talking about the trees, because those are taxed later at 100% of fair market value when it's harvested. So keep in mind, we're just talking about the dirt here. And when land gets up above $700, $800 an acre, typically you can't practice forestry on it and make a living off of the land. Is that accurate? $700, $800, which translates into what, $3 an acre?
Yeah, about $3 an acre. Where the rub is that because forestry is a long-term bet, when I plant trees today, I will be almost at the end of my life before those are harvested. Hopefully, I'll be lucky to get 3 crops out of what I've planted. But that's really working hard and hoping I live a long time. So I'm making a bet. I'm investing a lot of money in those trees, and yet the ad valorem tax I have to pay every year just to keep my investment, even when I don't harvest the trees. And so the problem with the ad valorem tax is it hits me every year whether I have any income coming in or not. And not only do I have to pay it on the dirt, but when I get ready to harvest the timber, which is the crop I've been growing and paying the right to grow every year, I still have to pay the tax on it at 100% of the value. There's no other, as far as I know, ad valorem tax is in the state that taxes you at 100% of fair market value at the then current millage rate that exists in the county that crop is harvested in. So the burden is great. It is much greater than is necessary or can be sustained in a good business sense. And so what's happened is that landowners are saying, okay, I can't make it growing trees, so I'll sell out in 10-acre blocks and split it up and put houses on it. And it just leads to more urban sprawl and less green space and poor water quality and all of those things that the benefits that we get out of forest land cease to accrue when that occurs.
Thank you.
You finished, Representative?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. 29, Representative Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I appreciate it. I want to reiterate again, I know you haven't had time to read, but the way the legislation currently is drafted, I don't believe helps your situation. Is that correct? It's geared toward the homeowner. That's neither here nor there. And I want to follow up because you can make a compelling argument. My gentleman to my left is the chair of economic development. But in Georgia, we have the opportunity to, through tax policy and through policy that we make as lawmakers, to attract industries and jobs into Georgia that's good for our 9 million plus citizens. And I think you bring today, aside from the direct policy that we're talking about in this bill, a compelling argument for a discussion on this state looking into tax reform and tax policy that Georgians will support to keep that industry. I'm convinced that other people pay taxes on their factories as they're building things, and I mean you'll make your case, and other people will make theirs. But I appreciate you guys taking the time to do that and the work you've done. My question is, have you been able to compare Georgia, and you did a little bit, and then offline for a different day, with other states? I know other states don't do it at all or do it some. You talked about North Carolina where things are saving. But we talked about this a little bit last year, Steve, the overall turnover economic benefit, just not the fact that you'd sell it in 10-acre blocks, but what that does. I mean, other states have affected action. I'd like to ask you at a later time to present to us some sort of cause and effect that we've seen happen around the state, both from an environmental and an economic standpoint, because you bring a different argument than we're talking about today, but a very valid one. If you could bring that to us at a later time.
Thank you. I would like to say, too, that, you know, this industry that we spoke of, this $27 billion industry is here because the trees are here. And you can't be in the forestry business without trees, and you can't have trees without land. And so that's the economic side. In addition, there are all these environmental benefits that if forests weren't providing them, here again I refer to the article in the paper yesterday, if forests weren't providing them, then local governments would have to be providing them in terms of you know, cleaning up water and that sort of thing. So I'll be glad to develop something and get it to the committee.
Mr. McWilliams, Mr. Sullivan, thank you very much for your input. Wish you a good day. Members of the committee and also testifiers, we're running a little bit behind, so I'll ask you to be judicious about your, maybe we can shorten our questions down to maybe under 5 minutes per stating a question. Chuck Clay or Linda Schultz, you with us? Chuck? Oh, Linda? Fulton County Schools, is that right? Okay, welcome. Good afternoon. Hello.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to come before you today. I'm Linda Schultz. I'm an elected school board member with Fulton County School Board, and this is Chuck Clay. Many of you aren't familiar with Chuck Clay. I don't believe he needs much of an introduction. I'm here also representing the Georgia Education Coalition today. The Georgia Education Coalition consists of 9 large and or growing school systems across the state of Georgia. The school systems involved are Cartersville City, Cherokee, Cobb, Coweta, Fayette, Fulton, Gwinnett, Henry, and Savannah-Chatham. Combined, these school systems educate approximately 30% of all the students in our public school system. Now, my constituents are very concerned about this proposal for several reasons. One has to do about the possible loss of programs due to the instability of funds from sales tax. I know you heard a lot of testimony about this yesterday, and I don't want to belabor the point. So suffice it to say that Fulton County Schools, the Georgia Education Coalition, and my constituents are worried about this, and also the possibility of losing some of the programs that we offer to our students that are not offered through state funding. I'm going to address a few technical issues that I don't believe have come before the committee, and just want to bring this for your consideration and discussion as you debate this topic. One issue has to do with capital funding. Now, I appreciate all the efforts that we've had across this committee to ensure that we had 100% capital fund outlay throughout the years, and what we have received from the state to help us. But keep in mind, this is a group of very fast-growing school systems. And to give you an example with Fulton County, we are fortunate that we have the SPLOST, which you are all familiar with, that we can help fill some of the gaps. With the last SPLOST that we had and offered, we were able to raise $593 million in sales tax revenues. The state funding portion for that program over the 5 years was $88.2 million, which again, we really appreciate what we get. That does come to 12.7% of the needs that we have within our school system. So you can see that majority of what we are doing is through the sales tax. And even with the sales tax that we have currently, we are not able to keep pace with the growth. I tell my constituents that get used to portables. It's a way of life regardless of with the sales tax. So where this is leading me is that many school systems are seeing the need to also do a bond referendum in addition to the sales tax. We have concerns that the proposal before you will severely limit our ability to seek a bond referendum in the case where we need to fill some of these gaps and provide classroom space for our students. This works against us in many ways because we have to fund portables out of our general fund. It creates issues for us to be able to meet the class sizes that we want to be able to offer to our students, and in accordance with what you have asked us to do from a state funding standpoint. The other issue that has to do with bonds is what currently we have. Among these school systems, there is actually currently $1.9 billion in bond indebtedness. Now, I know the current proposal exempts the property tax that is allocated to address this bond indebtedness. However, we are concerned that our constituents will view this as an added tax, that they will still be paying some property tax for the bond indebtedness at the same time that they are going to have some consumer taxes on top of that. So they are expressing some concerns that this will actually raise the tax burden within that school system. My constituents are also very concerned about shifting tax dollars between counties. Now, I know this is a very difficult issue, and I certainly am sympathetic to your charge to make sure that education across the state is equitable and that all students are educated appropriately. I agree with that philosophy. But I'm not sure this proposal actually addresses the root of that problem. And my constituents are concerned that all we will end up with in Fulton County is supplying more money to other parts of the state without getting the return benefit. Finally, in closing, this is a very technical issue, so bear with me for a moment. But it came up into discussion from a school board member's perspective. We are starting to head into our budget season. And we start very early. As you know, there is a shortage of teachers across the state. So it's become somewhat of a game to see who can get out first to be recruiting teachers. We start very early in the process. And then at the same time, we're trying to figure out what our actual budget's going to be because we don't know what the state is going to allocate, and we don't know what our tax revenues are. Now, where this is leading me to are questions that I would like to hear bring to your attention about the timing of this whole proposal. I have been told that the money would actually flow to the school system about a year late because of the way that the millage rate has to be set. It has to flow through the tax assessor's office and then gets to the school system. I don't know for sure if that's correct. I'm certainly not here as a tax expert, but would appreciate some input to make sure that we are able to accommodate our budgets and move forward with that. I saw you shaking your head no, that's not correct. No. So thank you. Just in closing, the areas that I do want to, that I'll recap, that the concerns are, as you've heard before, with the instability of the sales tax, with local control, with the bond ability to continue to seek bond referendums. Thank you. We'll entertain questions.
Thank you. I see none. Senator Clay, good to see you as always. Wish you a good day. Oh, we see one now. Representative Floyd.
I'm sorry.
Floyd, excuse me.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for your testimony. Just had a couple of questions about Fulton County schools. Are there any exemptions from school tax that Fulton County provides to seniors or to any other group?
Fulton County does, actually. The entire county does. And I'm not sure exactly what those exemptions are. I think the best example I can use, and I hope she's not listening today, is my mom. She has a around $160,000, $180,000 home site, and she pays $100 in taxes and complains about it. She didn't hear that.
So she doesn't.
She does get quite a bit of exemptions.
And so she would not be paying a property tax for.
She does pay for some school, but there are some exemptions built into that. I'll be glad to get you the exact data if you would like.
Yeah, I'm just trying to ascertain how many people would be impacted and how they would be. if in fact there are a group of people who are not paying school taxes now.
The seniors, I believe, are very well taken care of, especially from the governmental standpoint. They do get quite a bit of break from the school taxes, and I'll be glad to get you the exact
One other group that I'd like to query you on, do you have a feel for how much of the population of your schools are non-homeowners or renters, so they wouldn't be getting they wouldn't be getting any tax exemption, but they would get the additional sales tax? What percentage of the schools are renters versus homeowners?
I do not have a feel from that standpoint. Again, I'd be glad to ask if we can come up with that data. I don't think we can really draw an analogy between our free and reduced lunch percentages. Right. Direct analogy, that might be the closest that we could come with, and I'm not trying to stereotype here, but often there is an association between free and reduced lunch and those that are homeowners, and I think we all could agree with that.
What is that?
Our free and reduced lunch percentage is around 36% and climbing.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Is that Ms. Jones? Representative Jones.
I'd just like to clarify, Representative Flood, since you do represent a portion of Fulton County. Fulton County does not offer senior exemptions for school taxes or for low income. It's only at the county. The county does if you're a low income senior, and then the cities do. So they would all continue.
And this legislation also reduces or eradicates the ad valorem tax on automobiles, so renters wouldn't just necessarily solely not be exempt. So it's for purpose of clarification. That's all the questions. We thank you. This is an ongoing inquiry. If you have further information you would like to deposit with the committee through Senator Clay or yourself, we're open to that. Hope we're easy to find, and thank you very much for your input.
Thank you all very much for your time. Less is better.
Appreciate it.
I apologize again to those folks that signed up at a specific time. We are running a little bit behind, and I'm sorry. We'd like to be timely, but we feel like it's more important to hear all the facts that we possibly can. So we've been very patient with the extension of testimony. I noticed the CEO of DeKalb County is with us. We're always glad to hear from the Honorable Vernon Jones with DeKalb County. If you'd come forward, please, sir. Good afternoon and welcome. He's going to be here all day anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of this committee. Many of you I've had opportunity to serve with and maintain that long-term relationship with, and I appreciate the job that you all do for the great state of Georgia. As you know, Georgia is probably one of the most progressive and fastest-growing states in the country, and a lot of it is due to your hard work and your commitment to the Georgians that live here and work here each and every day. I do want to say, Mr. Chairman, I've been around long enough now to know that by the time the legislation is introduced and the governor's signature, it has made many turns and many twists and taken different changes and different obstacles in its course to the governor's desk. So I'm not going to comment specifically on the language in this legislation, but I do want to talk to you from a different perspective, from someone who has to run a government each and every day, someone who's elected to the executive branch. I manage about 8,000 employees. I'm elected from about 750,000 people. I have to submit a budget and get that budget approved through my Board of Commissioners every year. And I want to tell you, I am like you. I'm a person who's fiscally responsible, believe in low taxes, and certainly quality delivery of services. And I have to do that each and every day. And when I served in the legislature, I voted for a balanced budget and cut taxes. And as I've served as chief executive, I've submitted and passed a balanced budget each year, never raised taxes. As a matter of fact, there's been instances I've reduced taxes. So I am very, very supportive and in agreement with you on how we can place as little of a tax burden on the people of Georgia. But I do have to also speak to you from experience on how and what you're attempting to do here, and that is to change property taxes or shift property taxes to sales taxes as a source to receive revenue and to deliver and pay for services. I can tell you this. I've given you a sheet of paper, and I'll refer to that in just a second. Let me talk first about property taxes. When we collect property taxes, and I know, by the way, this legislation speaks to school taxes and not for cities and counties. But as you know, once you open that door, other options become available. So I understand this, but I'm not representing any group. I'm just here to share with you some information to help you in your deliberation, making your decisions. But property taxes are a consistent source of revenue. You can almost be assured that people are going to pay their property taxes because of the way the governments have in receiving those dollars when they don't pay their taxes. So you can also be assured that because that's their number one investment, they are going to protect and maintain that investment. But when you lose revenue, or if a county or government is about to lose revenue on property taxes based on someone's home, at this point being a lien being placed on it, that government has a way to recoup those taxes. Because when that home goes on the auction block, that government would sell that home, recoup those dollars, and not be put in a deficit position. That's a consistent source. In almost every case, people are going to pay their taxes. And even, again, when there's a lien placed on that home because that person, he or she did not pay those taxes, there's a way to recoup those dollars. And that is important when you're delivering services. On the other hand, when you look at a sales tax, Mr. Representative, when you look at a sales tax, it is a very inconsistent and at times volatile source of revenue, primarily because you cannot dictate or predict a person's spending patterns. Right now, because of the cost of gasoline, you're seeing people shift on how they're spending and where they're spending their money. Gas is going to soon be, as I understand it, up to about $3.50 per gallon. But let me take a step back. Back in May, I looked at the number of permits that were being pulled in DeKalb County, and I compared it to last year at that time, and I saw a significant decline in the permits that were being pulled. What that told me right then was that I needed to cut my budget, or cut each department's budget, by a percentage, because I saw something coming even before the state saw it coming. And when I had that cut in my budgets, because I knew when those permits go down, there was less homes being built. When there are less homes being built, there are less appliances being purchased for that home, less furniture being purchased for that home. And then you start to see the dip in the sales taxes. Now, when I said that back in May, a reporter reported on it and said I was cutting taxes, and they went to an expert at Georgia State, and the expert said that DeKalb County is an isolated situation. The government officials there are overly optimistic. They are not sure what they're doing. But he didn't see what I saw. And then later on, about 3 months later, I saw some of the members of the General Assembly who served on appropriations committees talk about, although state income is up, sales tax is starting to go down. And when sales taxes start to go down, you start looking for where you're going to be paying in the future for your expenditures, and what programs you can keep, what programs you can cut, and what programs you're not going to be able to expand. And so the reason for that is because, again, you cannot dictate a person's spending patterns. So in the property tax situation, Representative Parsons, you know you can recoup those dollars. You can almost believe you can, because you can put it on the auction block to get it. But when those sales taxes go down, you cannot force that homeowner to go and buy more and purchase more items. And what happens there, you put yourself in a situation where you have to make some difficult decisions. And that's why I want you all to really understand this. And I gave you a copy. If I can turn your attention to the sheet I gave to you. If you look from 1999 to 2007 under the category of property taxes collections, you saw DeKalb County almost double in property tax collections from 1999 to about 2007. If you look under sales tax collections, though, and DeKalb, by the way, in 1999 started using a 1-cent sales tax to reduce property taxes. We shifted the burden. We started using the sales tax. Now, if you look at 99 to 2007, you only see about a $20 million increase, which is about, 20%. Sales taxes went up a little bit, then it flattened out, went down, picked up a little bit. Now, what we were doing, we started out in 1999 giving all of our customers 100% homestead exemption. What I mean by that, in 99, we took in $82 million worth of sales taxes. It cost us $69 million to give everybody 100% exemption. They paid absolutely zero in property taxes in 1999. We did the same thing in 2000, 2001. 2002, however, things started to shift. We collected $82,000 in sales taxes, but to give 100% exemption was going to cost us $98 million. From $82 million we collected to now to give them 100% exemption was going to cost us $98 million. The X crossed the Y, so all of a sudden our homeowners' taxes started to go up, and they said, "You're raising our taxes." No, we've given you all the money, but because spending has been down and has been flat, and more homes that come online, and assessment values, of course, increase, you pay more based on your assessment value, then that money started to run out. So these are the things that I see, and I just wanted to share it with you. And I also turn your attention to assessments. Assessments are important, and it's based on the value of your property. And everybody wants to have a home that is very valuable, but when they pay the taxes on it, they don't want to pay those taxes. Now, I understand that. But when you get ready to sell that home, you want to sell that home for the highest value you can sell it for. Now, DeKalb County, starting this year, was hit with assessment freezes. It's good for our customers. They're able to pay less in taxes based on assessment freeze. But let me tell you the impact that had on us, too. This year, it had about a $4.5 million impact on our budget. We lost, or we didn't bring in $4.5 million that we would have brought in normally. I wanted to put 200 police officers on the streets. I could only put 50 on the streets. I wanted to fund more infrastructure improvements. It had a profound impact on my budget. We're building libraries right now, and we're looking for ways to staff those libraries. Libraries are important. That $4.5 million is for 5 years. That's going to cost me $20 million, or I'll lose $20 million. And so as you make these decisions, I think it's important to see how it's going to have an impact on the school system's capital project needs, how it's going to have an impact on them just primarily delivering the services that they're supposed to be delivering. And I know that this bill does not impact local governments in terms of cities and counties, but again, once you open that door, everything becomes an option. And someone may say, well, maintain your spending. When I was in the legislature, when I left, your budget was about $8 billion. Now your budget's to the tune of about $16 billion. Now, more and more demand came from customers. More and more people came to Georgia. The cost of building roads and material started to increase. A number of things cause your expenditures to go up, and you have to have a stable source of revenue to maintain and keep up with those expenditures. And so, again, to the members of this distinguished body, for someone who have to live this each and every day, deliver these services, keep taxes low, cut taxes when we can, provide those quality services, look for ways to create and bring in new revenue, it is a challenge. And I know it's a challenge for all of us, but I applaud the Speaker and all of you who are visionaries for wanting to look for a way to shift and try to reduce the burden of taxes on Georgians as much as possible. But we have to be reasonable and we have to be rational when we're looking at funding services. So, Mr. Chairman, I thank you. I know that you're running behind. I didn't want to talk too long. I'll entertain any questions, comments, or observations at this time.
I do have one. If I'm understanding your figures that you gave us here, right, you implemented in '99. I presume that was part of your administration?
No, sir. I wasn't in the legislation. I wasn't an elected official at all. But it was passed, and that was the first year that we started using a 1-cent sales tax to reduce property taxes.
And you did that as 100% homestead exemption?
Yeah, it was initially the statute said that no less than 80% would be used for property tax reduction, and no more than 20% for infrastructure improvements. So there was the original calculations, however, and Bart Ladd was in the state senate at the time. The original calculation was that there was going to be this windfall of sales taxes. So the first year, the sales taxes that were predicted, it was about 25% below what was originally predicted. But there was enough that had come in. As you can see the figures, we brought in $82 million. To give 100% homestead exemption cost us $69 million, so the remaining dollars were used for infrastructure improvements. But that first year, there was enough to give more than 100% exemption. But
so are you saying that you would do away with this system now? Do you still have the 1 cent?
I have to, yes, sir, we do, because it was voted in and passed by the voters. I have to say this, though, Mr. Representative, Mr. Chairman. We want to keep our homeowners' property taxes as low as possible. It has helped us to reduce property taxes. But it did not do what it was sold to do. It was sold that there was going to be such a windfall of revenue that we would be able to continue to give 100% exemption. Now, I ended up taking the blame for it when I became chief executive, because they were saying, well, my tax was increased, and you said that I would never have to pay any more property taxes. But I don't know a place in America where you pay no property taxes. I also recognize, and Chairman Hill, Wayne Hill, who's my dear friend, a good Republican, I believe, like me, a fiscal conservative, he told me when I came into office that that was a death mark for me to have to deal with that 1 cent sales tax using for property tax reduction, that I could not run government. We only use about, again, 20%. So $18 million we use for the entire county for infrastructure improvements, unless we get some matching dollars from the state and federal government. So it didn't do what it was predicted to do. But certainly it has reduced property taxes. Certainly it has. But it has put more of a strain on the county to deliver the services.
Thank you. I don't see any questions. We appreciate hearing from you. Wait a minute. I do see 124. Is that Representative Tumlin?
Just one of the issues that come up during these hearings is that people would lose their standard deduction. Have you got many complaints in the way you do it in DeKalb?
Well, it's not that we have gotten complaints about losing deduction, because, again, DeKalb County does pride itself on having probably the lowest property taxes for government operating services, probably in the metro Atlanta area. I think our complaints come from people want it both ways. They want to keep their taxes low, but they want the services.
Well, excuse me.
You're talking about the federal deduction.
Yeah, I was talking about the federal deduction. You know, they don't get to deduct property tax on their 1040. And that's been one of the complaints here. Okay. And you're doing that in DeKalb, and obviously they can't deduct sales tax. So
no, sir.
Do you get many complaints about if you don't have it?
Well, we don't have it. And again, that's not where my complaints are coming from.
I know, but I was doing it just for
yes, sir.
my own.
But I just do want to stress, though, I really do want to stress. You look at states like Florida, where they use they don't have state income taxes. I think this body should seriously consider looking at the way Florida does. I think it's one of the states where you don't pay state income taxes, but you pay higher property taxes. I'm not sure where in America, and there may be a place I may just not be knowledgeable of it, where you don't pay any property taxes, is substituted with a sales tax. It may be going on, but I'd be interested in talking to those governments and seeing if it works and whether the pitfalls are. Because some people are talking in theory, they're textbook government operators, but they've never run a government before in their lives, and so it sounds good in a textbook, but when you actually have to do it, it's a little different. And so, I just would like for you all to really talk to those people who have to live and breathe it every day, and maybe you can get some additional understanding of this process.
Okay, we really need to move on, but we'll take these 20. How many? I got 3 now. 27. No? 12. Who's 12?
Thank you. On the sheet here that you have regarding this is the host sales tax collection,
yes,
correct?
Sir.
Are you currently applying 100% of this money to reduce the property taxes, or only 80%?
No, sir. At this point, because the revenue has gone down significantly and the demand has gone up, we're providing 80%. I'm using that 20% to do infrastructure improvements, road improvements, and other types of ways of improving our infrastructure, because we don't have a 1 cent sales tax like Cobb and Gwinnett dedicated to infrastructure, other than this 1% homestead exemption. And that's why I'm saying when we shift it to a sales tax, I'm showing you that these are the pitfalls from going to a sales tax and what you have to deal with.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
13, is that Ms.
Yes,
Jones?
I had a question. You mentioned DeKalb having a low tax burden, but information we received yesterday mentioned it has DeKalb listed as having the highest millage rate combined county and school in the state, and the 7th highest per capita net digest. Is your concern that with the cap that's currently in the bill that you couldn't raise it higher than that?
First of all, ma'am, I'm not sure your source of your information, Madam Representative. DeKalb County's millage rate.
This is school and county
okay.
combined 39 mills.
Well, I'm speaking from the county side. 70 cents on every dollar in DeKalb County certainly goes to the school system. And DeKalb is about 20%, about 10% for bond indebtedness. So when I mentioned among the lowest in terms of taxes, it's for government operating services, and I think I outlined that when I made that comment. But I think you're, ma'am, up in one of the newest cities, up in Fulton County, and as you know, when those cities were created, now that they're in business and have to operate, every dollar counts. And they're running short now on dollars that they need for infrastructure improvements, and they're even having to come back to the state and ask for additional dollars so they can run a government out there. So now you can shift that tax burden to a sales tax, but what you do is shift the burden back to local governments, including the school system, to raise the millage rate, to pick up additional revenue, to continue to pay for those services. And I think when you put us in a box like that, I think it's harmful in the long haul to that resident. But again, I'll say this. Up in your neck of the woods, prestigious North Fulton County, I'll say, they're having challenges right now in running those local governments. Now, if you open that door and it goes from the school system to the cities and the counties, in terms of replacing property tax with a sales tax, they're going to have some serious challenges as well. And so I'm not just speaking of the position you're in today, but where you're going to be down the road and the impact it can have on you down the road and your ability to maintain a good quality infrastructure and provide those quality customer services that you have provided your customers.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I don't see any other questions. We'd like to thank you for your input, your participation. If you have further comments, this committee is always open to you, sir, and we'll be glad to hear from you in the future. We're still in the process of deliberation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of this distinguished committee.
A very patient man, Mr. Julian Bowen, who signed up here earlier. Mr. Bowen, are you still with us? Thank you so much for your patience. Good afternoon and welcome, and we're glad to hear from you.
Mr. Chairman, after listening to Chairman Jones, every county in the state of Georgia is different. Now, I was county commission chairman in Forsyth County, and I'm concerned about Forsyth County because I live there, but I'm also concerned about Stevens County, where I was last night watching my two grandsons play ball. When you think about taxation, in Forsyth County, we don't tax senior citizens over 65. No school property tax. None. That equates to about 10,000 people that are going to have a huge tax increase. Every county is different. And when you try to cover all counties with the same blanket, you're going to have problems. This has to be done slowly, and it has to be done carefully. I met Mr. Morgan, and I told him he ought to move across the county line. Cherokee's having problems, and we don't have that in Forsyth. Politics is tough in Forsyth. Be careful. Take your time. If you make a mistake, be the laughing stock of the country. We don't need that. Be careful. Take your time. Thank you.
Any? Hard to question that. I think we'll certainly take that advice seriously, and thank you. You're obviously a very committed, dedicated person. Thank you. And I mean that seriously. To wait as long as you have on these hard benches for that message, we sincerely appreciate that. Honestly, that's not meant flippantly.
My grandsons went
I promise you we'll try to figure out a way to never tax spoiling grandchildren. Okay, what's her name? Oh, gosh. Miss Teresa Link with the City School of Decatur, and I apologize to you. You were actually in order sooner, and I skipped over you just because I can't see. My apologies. Welcome. Good afternoon. We're glad to hear from you.
That's okay. I'm used to it. I'm only 5 foot. I'm hard to see in a lot of places. Hello, Chairman O'Neill and members of the committee. My name's Teresa Link. I'm the Finance Director for City Schools of Decatur. And I thank you for taking this time to hear from those of us who'd like to provide feedback regarding the issues surrounding taxation and the impact that it has on education, our most treasured resource. Although City Schools of Decatur opposes House Resolution 900 and Senate Resolution 20, we are in favor of comprehensive tax reform. So far, many of the taxation ideas may need to take in greater consideration of the communities and the individuals throughout the state of Georgia. Tax reform needs to encompass the following: allow local control, incorporate stability to withstand economic changes, adequately fund the obligations of the state of Georgia, and improve fairness of who pays. At City Schools of Decatur, our Board of Education and community believe that the value of an educational experience from a small school system outweighs the local property tax burden, as evidenced by our board members being reelected and running unopposed. The idea to eliminate property taxes seems to overlook the values and choices each local community contributes to improving education. School districts throughout the state are unique, and local sources of revenue allow the district to fund what is special, unique, and valuable to that community. Property taxes are our most stable source of revenue, whereas sales taxes are more volatile to changes in the economy. State revenue is primarily made up of sales and income taxes that fund education, among other areas. In fiscal year 2003, the state could not fund their expenditure obligations to school districts throughout Georgia as a result of a sudden downturn in our economy. This is known to us as the austerity reductions that have been imposed on school districts and are still in place in the current fiscal year. And we're being told that the austerity reductions will continue in next fiscal year in spite of an improved economy. So how are these tax proposals accounting for economic downturn? Georgia is among the lowest ranked states in relation to educational outcomes. City School of Decatur would like to see increases in educational funding throughout Georgia. Sales taxes. We do want to see an increase in sales taxes. In today's economy, we've got shoppers buying more and more services. Yet Georgia's current sales taxes is a structure from 1951 when we were primarily a goods-based society. Georgia taxes in the neighborhood of 36 services, but on average, other states in the nation charge 57 different services. City Schools of Decatur recommends legislative review of the current services that charge sales tax with an effort to improve sales tax base by increasing the number of services being charged to consumers, yet not at the cost of local property tax revenue. The concept of homestead values could increase by 1%, or that the property taxes could only increase at the state inflation rate without otherwise having a local referendum, has flaws, and that it does not reflect the actual cost of serving the school population. The inflation rate cost is more like 2 to 3 times greater in education than the average inflation rate. You've heard Fulton County talk about the growing districts. Well, even if you're not a growing district, just look at the teacher salary scale. built into that salary scale is 3% right there with on the steps for the teachers. How will the state of Georgia fund the teacher salary scales on sales taxes or arbitrary restrictions on property taxes, particularly if we're in economic recession or a flat economy? The current tax structure impacts lower income Georgians the most. People with a lower income pay a higher percentage of their salary in taxes than those with a higher income. These proposals continue to exacerbate an unfair tax structure. Sales tax is the least fair, property tax more fair than sales, and income tax the most fair. Homestead exemptions for seniors can provide some property tax relief. City Schools of Decatur School Board has approved several exemptions which target homeowners and their ability to pay. We choose to lose 5.5% of our local property tax revenue as a result of the exemptions that are offered. That total amount in lost revenue for City Schools of Decatur is $1.2 million. Georgia already has low property taxes relative to the rest of the nation, and our state is ranked 35th. Considering that information, it's unclear why there is this movement to eliminate property taxes. City Schools of Decatur understands the regressive nature of property taxes and would favor reform which is tied to the ability to pay, like a circuit breaker program. Then, Georgia's income tax brackets have not changed significantly since the 1930s, at a time when a $10,000 income was a decent living. Today's incomes are much higher and should be taxed through a modern income tax structure. Income taxes are the most progressive and fair. City Schools of Decatur would support legislative efforts to review the income tax brackets and create a new top tax rate. Now, you probably have heard some of this information, and I did a lot of research from Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, so that's where these ideas come from, and I encourage you to review their website because I think they have a lot of good things to offer us all as we think forward on how to make improvements. Thank you for your time and consideration as you and your colleagues deliberate the complex issues surrounding tax reform. We all want tax reform that is balanced, stable, adequate, and fair to address the growing needs and increased demands of public education in Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Link. Will you be willing to take some questions from
Absolutely.
the committee? Representative Martin.
Yes, sir. Ms. Link, I think you live in a world where, different from mine, with due respect, but I don't think we have a revenue problem in government, education or otherwise. I think we have a spending one, and everything I heard you say talks about, more revenue, more taxes. I think, that's a good policy discussion to have, but perhaps not for this. The specific question I wanted to ask you is, you said inflation in education is not the same as overall inflation. I don't necessarily disagree with that. I had asked that question of the gentleman from Houston County yesterday. My question would be, what specifically do you think attributes that, is that attributable to?
Well, the teacher salary scales. It's a state-defined salary scale, and on average, the step increases for a teacher is about 3%. So right there, that's 80% of our budget is salary and benefits. So right there, the salary scale that we're required to implement by the state of Georgia requires us to increase a teacher's salary roughly 3% because they've served us one more year. So that alone is one factor that creates 3% increases every year.
And that's what, if I might follow up just real briefly, Mr. Chairman. So it's careful in how we capture that, because what you're telling me is teachers are being compensated, on a raise basis at above the rate of inflation. And most of the teachers that I talk to don't feel like they're compensated at a rate where their increases will keep them up with inflation, including health care. Are you representing that to be a different fact? Because you said education the expenses are creating are increasing at a rate larger than inflation.
Correct.
So it is your position that we are compensating teachers more than the level of inflation?
All I'm saying is a salary scale that is a state-defined salary scale. On average, the teacher salaries increase 3% every year without any adjustment to that scale.
That's what's referred to in our state budget as a CPI increase.
CPI is if the legislative body of the governors make an adjustment to the existing scale. But the steps, the teachers have a 20-step scale, and the step increases have
on an annual basis. Okay, I wanted to get a clear distinction between that. So in addition to the CPI, but it's your position that is what's costing education. I'm just trying to, it seems like as a school system, I'm hearing you say that we're actually compensating our teachers too much and making, and mandating.
I am not saying that.
Well, if it's more than inflation, I mean, a lot of times there are people out there in private business, and just to be clear, I'm not saying that either. I think our teachers do a tremendous job, but we have to be careful as we're talking about that.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And if I could say a follow-up to that, City Schools of Decatur has lowered our millage rate for the last 4 years. At the same time, we've increased the exemption offerings to our elderly citizen homeowners.
Are you in DeKalb County? Is that where you are?
We are within DeKalb County, but we are an independent public school district.
Well, their taxes went up 108% in 8 years, property taxes. And you say that's a reduction in the millage rate?
The City Schools of Decatur has reduced their millage rate over the last 4 years. In 3 of the 4 years, we have not had to have the taxpayer bill of rights.
Is that because your assessments went up substantially?
We actually complied with the taxpayer bill of rights that we do the rollback calculation, and so as we met the rollback calculation and even went beyond that. So we had a conscious effort of cutting costs in our district and reducing the millage rate and giving more exemptions.
Great. Number 10, who's that? 10? Chairman Mills.
I'm trying to honestly evaluate the bill and comments, and I've heard repeatedly that the sales tax is not stable, but yet everybody who's come to this table, when I look at the county or the city they're from, they have a 1 cent sales tax going on in one form or fashion or another. And I'm just wondering, how do you logically and honestly say that it's not stable, but yet it's stable enough for us to use to build whatever we decide to build? In every city and every county, almost large numbers are doing it, and I just think it's a little disingenuous to say that it's not stable in one situation. It is stable enough for us in another, and if it's so unstable, then we ought to take it off the books as a legislature because we're doing cities and counties a disservice. And how do you say that? How do you say that it's not stable enough to have in place? I'm not talking about replacing. I'm just talking about when you have a 1 cent sales tax in place. It's stable enough for that. The citizens voted in.
Yes, I really do believe the SPLOST, the Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax, is actually a very brilliant capital funding mechanism, and I applaud Georgia for doing that. Really, what we need is the balance of all revenue sources, which is a balance of income tax, a balance of sales tax, and a balance of property tax. That's what we want to see. For our SPLOST revenue, for example, going back to 2003 again when we had the recession, City Schools of Decatur was collecting about $240,000 a month for sales taxes to fund our capital programs. Then, in August 2001, our revenue dropped so significantly that we were now down to $180,000 a month. Now, I would not want to be paying teachers' salaries based on that kind of swing we could see in the economy. But it is much easier to adjust your capital spending for that. So what was happening in 2001 is we heard a lot of the economic analysis saying, well, the economy's picking up, the economy's picking up. But that revenue stayed at another plateau. And even today, we're not even back at the level we were at in 2001. We're only collecting about $220,000. So we're still $20,000 short of where we were back in 2001. So sales tax, I think, is a very brilliant funding mechanism, particularly for capital projects, because you can scale back on what you're doing, you can phase things, you can postpone capital projects, but you cannot postpone paying a teacher's salary.
We know that because we pay them every year at the state.
Thank you.
Mr. Representative Flood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. And by the way, I think I've heard the question with regard to sales tax and its volatility before. And one way I've tried to reconcile it in my mind is how people who might be on a salary plus bonus scenario might manage their own personal finances, where if you have a guaranteed salary of $50,000 or $60,000 a year, but you have a fluctuating bonus that might be 10%, 15% of your total income, you know that you can count on that base salary, and that whatever is your bonus, then you can make other adjustments based on what that bonus is. So it seems to me like that's a reasonable comparison to say that if you use a 1% sales tax, it doesn't fund the core and most significant expenses in the school district, but it does allow you the flexibility when the dollars are there to pay for other expenses. Would that be fair?
Yes and no. I wouldn't call it a bonus, though, because City Schools of Decatur has been fortunate and unfortunate where we've not borrowed money. But because of that, we've had a lot of deferred maintenance. So then when the SPLOST referendum came about, it allowed us to really start addressing the deferred maintenance in our buildings. And like you heard Fulton County say, even with the SPLOST revenue, you're still borrowing some more money. So Decatur now has borrowed its first $16.5 million in a 50-year history. So I agree with your analogy, but I wouldn't call it a bonus.
One other question. In yesterday's testimony, we received some information about the cost to educate people in the metro area. And Fulton County has the highest at $8,627, according to, this is 2005 data. And Clayton County had the lowest at $67. Decatur, for county schools, Decatur had a cost per pupil of $12,378. What do you attribute to the vast difference in the cost per pupil in the city of Decatur and neighboring school systems?
Small schools. We have had a philosophy of, we believe the smaller school provides a better education environment for students. The state funding formula, which most of my peers try to maximize the state funding formula, for an elementary school, for example, you earn the money you need if you have at least 450 kids in that school. And many elementary schools in the metro area are well above that. They may have 1,000 kids in an elementary school. City Schools of Decatur doesn't even have that many. We're 330 kids in our elementary school. So we choose on purpose not to maximize our funding. And so in doing that, it requires local property tax effort to make up that difference. And our parents have fought for that. Back in 2005, we closed 2 schools. And we were trying to address issues such as the austerity reductions. Our local 5 mills continues to grow. And then the property taxes. We did have citizens complain about the property taxes. So we've closed our first 2 schools since I had been there. And it was so upsetting to parents that they even entertained a petition to try to take us to court to prevent that from happening. So our citizens want the small schools. And then we do have a logistical issue of we're 4 square miles. So we do not have property to really build the 1,000-student elementary school, even if we wanted it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
24, is that Representative Tumlin?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for being here. One question I'd like to ask is something's come repeatedly, and you're the last to do it, so I'd like to ask you. And I agree that sales tax is a regressive tax, but from time to time and situation to situation, couldn't property tax be regressive? Low income, unemployment, and also you mentioned 3% raises for teachers, and then you have a 25% increase in property tax. I mean, couldn't categorically property tax be regressive also?
It is, but not as regressive as sales tax. So it's in tiers, income tax being the most fair, property tax in the middle, and then sales tax.
The fellow without a job might disagree with you, but
understand.
Thank you.
Yeah, at least sales tax you determine when you do. Who's 15?
Just a question. Have you had a chance to read this bill yet?
I have in executive summary forms.
But you haven't had a chance to read the whole bill yet.
No.
Okay, thank you.
I think that concludes all the questions I see. Thank you very much, Ms. Link, for your testimony. And I think we have one speaker left. And I guess I could say we saved the best for last, maybe. Mr. Clint Mueller with the ACCG is here to share his wisdom with us, and we sincerely appreciate it. Mr. Mueller, good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's a privilege to come before you today to talk about tax reform. I think you've got a packet of information that we've put in front of you, and I just want to tell you what's in there. We've got a property tax video that we did on how the property tax system works, which is a first step in talking about tax reform. Our policy positions are in there, a list of what counties do and which services are mandated and which ones are not, which ones we have discretion over and which ones we're required to do by the Constitution or general law, and also a brief depiction of how we capture revenues and how we spend those revenues, what are the expenditure categories and how much of our budget those consume. So that's what's in your packet for you to take with you and look at. Like all the other speakers that have come before me, I think everybody's in support of tax reform. Nobody's going to get up here and say they're not for tax reform. Unlike some of the speakers that have come before me, though, I'm going to limit my comments and make them relevant to the current proposal that's before you today. I'm not going to talk about the broader topic of tax reform in general. The draft legislation that you have before you is what I've come here to talk about. It may surprise you, but the bill before you, or the draft piece of legislation before you that talks about replacing the vehicle ad valorem taxes with a homestead tax relief grant credit, our members are in support of. Long as we can assure that the credit will be paid, obviously if the credit's not paid in the future, there's going to be some political fallout for somebody. But as long as it's paid, we don't have a problem with funding the vehicle ad valorem taxes through a homestead tax relief grant credit. I'm not going to comment on the school piece because I don't represent schools. I represent county governments, all 159 county governments. Now there is one provision in your bill. It's on page 3, line 24. That's the thicker piece of legislation, the enabling legislation. And this was referenced yesterday by Jim Davis and Dan Ray, tax commissioner in Rockdale County. And it deals with the appeals process. And what it does is it provides for a second opportunity to appeal your assessment after you get your property tax bill. The one concern we have with that provision, by the time people get their property tax bill, the millage rate's already been set. The budget has been adopted, and we've based our budget and our millage rate on anticipated revenues. So depending on
Clint, let me interrupt you. Give us that site again, page 3.
Oh, excuse me. Page 3, line 24, I believe.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Yes. It's It's code section 48-5-306.2. But so it's a planning issue for us. If we are setting our millage rate and our budget based on what we anticipate the revenues to be, if you have a large number of people that wait till after they get their tax bill to make the appeal, and there's a lot, and they take it, say, to the Board of Equalization, the Board of Equalization splits the difference, we could have a significant reduction in the revenues that weren't anticipated. I think that maybe there needs to be some opportunities for appeal, but there's got to be a time certain point in the year where if the appeal hasn't been made by that point, that you have to wait till next year. We did this with the homestead, your homestead exemptions. We changed the law a few years ago to allow people to file for homesteads year round, and that was a good change. But what we did too at the time, we said if you don't meet a certain cutoff date, you can come in and file your homestead later, but it won't apply till next year. And that works for us. I think it's the same with the digest. We just need a date certain because we can't just allow people to appeal at any time and then have to give refunds, potentially give a bunch of refunds, and that really, then again, impacts the budget. Most of our concerns right now are probably going to be with some of the legislation that will be introduced on the Senate side. I just want to really mention this briefly to you because I know this is going to come before the committee, and some of it's referenced in the bill before you. On the assessment freeze issue, I've got members that like assessment freezes and members that don't like it. So ACCG does not have a policy position on whether that's a good assessment freezes are a good policy or not, and I'm not going to sit there and discuss it because we don't have a policy position on it. But what we would like to see is that if there's a referendum to determine if assessments are going to be frozen, that those be done county by county. I do think the state constitution needs to be changed because we got a lot of counties that have floating homestead exemptions now, which does the same thing in effect, but those have never been challenged in court. Some people cite the Columbus-Muskogee County case, but that was not they have a true assessment freeze. So those things are likely to be unconstitutional. So I do think we need to amend the state constitution to authorize assessment freezes. But from that point, I think that it's better policy to let each county decide for themselves whether that's appropriate for their county, because we have a lot of different kind of counties. We have a lot of growth counties, and we have counties that aren't growing very quickly, and it does impact counties differently depending on their growth rates. So we would ask the committee to consider allowing local referendums instead of a state referendum to implement an assessment freeze. On the tax expenditure limitation bill, the concerns that we have with tax expenditure limitations are county governments have a lot of costs that aren't clearly under the control of your Board of Commissioners. They're responsible to the taxpayers, but they're implementing a lot of services and things that are mandated on them by other levels of government, the Constitution, the courts. For instance, jails. We are going to house prisoners in jails because we constitutionally are mandated to do so, and we're going to provide them with medical care because we're constitutionally mandated to do so. Those aren't options. And we have constitutional officers, and we have very limited control over the constitutional officers' budget. So these are some of the things that we don't have real good controls over, but they make up the majority of our budget. If you look at the county's budget, over 50% of our budget is what I just talked to you. It's the criminal justice system. It's your courts, your jails, your sheriff's office. That's most of our budget. So if we have a tax expenditure limitation in those areas of our budget that we can't control or exceeding the limitation, then you put the county commissioners in a position where their only recourse is to cut from the areas of the budget that they do have control over. So they may not be able to give their other employees a cost of living increase for several years, or they may have to make dramatic cuts in library and recreation and those types of services they do have control. All we're asking you to do is just consider the things. It's one thing to put limitations on the things that the Board of Commissioners controls, but to say that now they've got to spend money on an area that they don't control but still come under a revenue cap is going to put a lot of them in a difficult situation. Also, when we build capital projects, when we open those facilities, there's a large maintenance and operational cost that goes along with that. And when people vote on SPLOST or GEO bond referendums, the public doesn't always think about the maintenance and operation costs. They think, I'm going to pay a 1% sales tax for 5 years to build this facility, and then I'm done. Well, guess what? We've got to now operate this thing for forever, and it's going to be a cost associated with that. And maybe people need to know up front what the maintenance and operation costs are going to be, or estimates of what those costs are going to be. But when one of those facilities is opened, it could also force us to exceed any kind of tax expenditure limitation. Cobb's a good example. They're about to open a brand new jail. And when they open that facility, they're going to be mandated to staff it at a certain level. And it's going to cause a jump in their operating revenues in the year they open that facility. So if they were under some sort of tax expenditure limitation, then they would be forced to pull that from elsewhere in the budget. So those are the types of things that we ask you to consider when looking at the tax expenditure limitation. The other thing that a lot of presenters have already made reference to, if we start shifting our reliance more and more to sales tax, the one thing we would ask you to consider is fixing the existing sales tax system. When the Ways and Means Committee had their study in 2006 during that summer, y'all heard a lot about the problems with our current sales tax system and the lack of compliance. Several people have said, well, we estimate that 20% of it's going uncollected. I agree. We've got a leaky bucket right now. Before you put more water into that leaky bucket, you need to fix the holes in the bucket. I'm not saying that the sales tax is bad. I'm just saying that to make it fair for everybody that's responsible for paying it ought to have to pay it. And you ought not put some of your businesses at a competitive disadvantage because it's so easy not to comply. So I do think there's a lot of problems with our current sales tax system that need to be fixed. I'm going to limit my comments to that, and if you all have any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them.
19, who's 19? Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Mueller. I appreciate you coming out here today. And I talked to you a little bit before about this, and I've done a little more research since that time. But I wanted to ask you, under the current legislation as it's drafted, do you see how this could create some kind of disparity between homeowners and possibly some problems and conflicts between homeowners and business owners? And do you see any way that that could cause a problem for businesses in such a way and counties in a way that might even hinder economic development in the future?
Well, anytime that you focus on one piece of the base, in this case we're talking about homesteaded property, there's always the threat that some of that burden is going to get shifted to the non-protected properties. So in the case, if we're focusing all the relief on homesteads and the assessment freeze applies to homesteaded property, then in the future, if local governments raise their millage rates or change things, then some of that burden could begin to be shifted to the non-homesteaded property like your businesses. And again, businesses don't necessarily vote quite like homeowners vote. I know that there's a lot of business owners, but there's a lot more homeowners that don't own businesses. So it's politically maybe a little bit easier. But yeah, I think there's definitely the possibility of a long-term shifting effect to anybody that's not a protected class.
And let me just, Mr. Chairman, if I might follow up with one question here. Let me paint a scenario and just see if I'm accurately understanding this, because I don't want to misunderstand this. Under the current proposal, the tax relief is going to the homestead only, the homestead or the homeowner only, and their automobiles. I guess you might say homeowners and personal automobile owners. Is that correct? Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding.
Okay, so that's the only place where tax relief is actually given. So, under the current circumstances, if this were to pass as the way it is, could you see a scenario where the school system could raise the millage rate, or could desire to raise the millage rate to the full maximum amount, say in the first year? Say if you had a 20 mil cap, where the school board might raise it to the maximum. Is there any reason why they wouldn't attempt to do that? That's what I want to know. If they're not already at the max, would a school system resist to move the millage all the way to the maximum amount in the first year on all non-homestead properties? Because I see how it would almost look like a gold mine sitting there. They could say, hey, we can raise this. It'll just be on the businesses. The state's going to pay the homestead portion, and we're the businesses. There's no way that they can raise enough support to defeat this. It'd be very short-sighted. But tell me where I'm wrong in that scenario.
Well, I don't know the minds of elected officials, what they're willing to do, and yeah, there may be some that are willing to take all that they can get, but I think there will be more pressure over time, because if you, especially with the assessment freeze, if you cap a certain area in for whatever, they're going to feel like they need more revenue. I'm not going to say that they're just wanting to get all the revenue they want, but they're going to have legitimate reasons why they feel like they need more revenue in the future. And to get that, if the only way to get it is to go to the non-protected classes of property, then that really leaves them no choice but to shift the burden there over time.
I think that's an extreme danger of the current proposal as it is, and I think the proposal could be fixed. Obviously, if you take all parcels out, then that solves that problem. But when you leave just a few fish in the barrel, they're just going to be sitting there ready to be picked off, and I think that it becomes a very problematic situation for businesses, and short-term political leaders could, or short-term thinking political leaders could hinder economic development, which would hinder future revenue, future jobs, capital investment, real estate investment of all sorts for the county, which would be economically devastating, especially for border counties like where I live.
Well, I think that's why you see the caps in this legislation, both at the assessment level and the total expenditure level. Which
on the Senate side?
That's what yes, sir. That's not in this bill, but that's what he was talking about earlier.
But with a referendum, could they not be raised?
With a referendum, they could, yes.
And that's my concern, Mr. Chairman, is that where is the political pressure not to pass a referendum other than just the kind-heartedness of the voters to make sure they don't hurt local businesses? And I don't, sometimes that's a dangerous thing to trust.
It's a valid concern. You mentioned about the caps. Obviously, that's not in this bill. We acknowledge there are certain mandated services that county levels of government have to provide from their local taxpayers. Sheriffs comes to mind occasionally. Jails, like you mentioned, those are the ones. Is there any level of potential compromise that you see in that regard? Obviously, budget experience is going to come into play a lot. If the spending cap is 4%, as well as adjusted for value added, say actual sales and improvements, getting sort of intimate in here. Do you see, and you don't have to answer this today if you don't know an answer to it today, obviously I think we have to be sensitive to that. I mean, we can't require one thing on one hand and make it impossible by legislation on the other. Is there a possibility of any compromise on that particular issue, or any sort of index that would deal with that other than budgetary experience, in your view?
I do think there's some ways to compromise on that. I think that when you're dealing with constitutional officers, you got some options, making maybe them more accountable directly to the voter and the taxpayer. You otherwise, maybe you exempt certain things from these caps. When we talk about some of the mandated items, right now we're talking about a water plan. There could be future mandates that come down dealing with water that are costly, and the local governments may be forced to pick up some of those costs. But when you talk about some mandates or anything that's outside of their decision-making power, if you exempt those items, that's another way to try to lessen that burden and putting them in that rock and a hard place.
You know, the other thing we're kind of painfully aware of is any exempted class is always very happy. But if the exemption is not coupled with either replacement of the tax or expenditure reduction, then that just means the burden shifts to other taxpayers. To us, that's not meaningful tax reform. We're trying to expand the base, not narrow the base. We would be very interested in your views as far as what might be a potential compromise. None of us want to put our local governing officials in a box, so to speak. That's not the desire of this committee, or my understanding, this legislation. And I hope you'll continue to work with us. We certainly value your opinion and your wisdom in this area.
Sure. Just to give you one example of what you just mentioned, in California where they have this Proposition 13, one of the things that's occurred is that a lot of the fees have gone up. we talk about impact fees being high in Georgia. The average impact fee in Georgia for the counties that have them is $2,000-3,000 on a residential home. Out there, you're talking about $50,000-60,000 on a residential home. So, yes, if you're not careful, you just, it's like the balloon effect. You just allow them to shift it to fees or something else, and you wind up just creating a shift.
Yeah, and like Representative Scott says, I think human nature tends to find the path of least resistance and probably the least transparent way. I mean, initially, the insurance premium tax was designed to fill the hole of a lot of those mandates. We don't ever seem to talk about that in a political setting. These franchise fees for the privilege of providing electricity that several local governments do well on, we don't talk about those either. So the other goal here is total transparency. I mean, I think taxpayers are entitled to know what they're paying it for, and why. And most of them are willing to do that when they're getting the services for that, and we hope to keep working toward that end here. 22, who's that? Richard? 20. Oh, Chairman Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Clint, thank you for what you presented to us today. I know that, realizing, reading all your responsibilities as a county, you come under the tax appraisal and so forth and so on, assessor. I talked to Jim Davis about this yesterday. 12 pages of this bill addresses the appeals process. Now, myself would probably have to get an attorney to go through all the steps that's in that outline. Is there any way to reduce this down to a sensible, common sense way of 1, 2, 3, whatever number of steps without going through? A lot of it is redundant. Now, I don't know whether we need to talk to Jim again, or whether that's something y'all can work through ACZG, is to try to simplify that appeals process. It would sure help, I think, the citizens if they have to go through this thing.
You're absolutely correct. It is very complex, and we'd be glad to work with you offline on that, because it's going to take some time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, we expect to have numerous more meetings about this. We certainly genuinely appreciate your input, as always, and all the staff at ACCG, and we hope that between everybody working toward the goal of fair, equitable, transparent tax reform, we'll get to a consensus somewhere that all of Georgia can be proud of, and not jeopardize any of those core services and core deliveries that we all agree on. Mr. Mueller, as always, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have one other witness, and I'm going to ask him to come up, and if we could limit your remarks to just a couple of minutes. Mr. Moore, you've been very patient waiting on us. The bill before us really deals with homesteads and educational taxes, and I understand you want to talk about that from the perspective of a hotel owner. I'm not sure that's real relevant, but if you can convince us that it is,
well,
go ahead.
I think it is very, very critical on one end. Let's take hotel tax, which it equates right on into sales tax. In Moultrie, Georgia, I built a Hampton Inn. We pay more. There's 7 other hotels. Collected hotel tax in the city of Moultrie, my hotel pays more than the other 7 put together. If you'll follow that to sales tax, it'll equate to about basically the same thing. About 20 years ago, mom and pops owned all the convenience stores, cleaners, hotels, all that stuff. Today they don't. Other people have come in and taken them. They don't tend to be as honest and reputable in paying that fair share of reported taxes. We say there's around $1.2 billion in internet loss of tax. I'm going to say there's probably that much loss of tax in unreported tax in Georgia. Mr. Graham with Revenue Department says his budget's been cut. He can't go out and police Georgia. If we go and put collections of revenue more on the Revenue Department with no more staff, and especially when they're not doing as good a job as they should be doing today, then it's going to be redundant and even more complicated. And what I'm saying, if you'll come go with me, just like I went to a Chevron this morning to get diesel to come up here, I saw alcohol being paid for with cash off the delivery truck. And I'll stand before court and say that. I saw a panel truck pull up to that same Chevron and take products into that Chevron that are sold off the counter, paid for in cash. And what I'm saying to you, gentlemen, is we're losing the revenue. When I was a commissioner, and Richard knows this, the first thing we did was reassess the county and put everybody on the fair and equal manner. And then we collected those taxes and balanced our budget. And our biggest problem in Georgia today is we're not keeping up with the revenue side. I do believe in redoing the the taxes structure like Mr. Glenn wants to do. But we've also got to do a better job of the revenue side of collecting the taxes. And on the schools, and I'm beginning to close, all of these people have got up and talked about schools. If they'll come to me and sit down with this legislative body, we can educate our children with less money, without trailers, and do a better job. I'll sit down at any time y'all want to sit down, and not only would I sit down with you, if you'll come to Henry County, I'll show you anytime. Thank y'all.
Thank you, sir. I don't have anybody else signed up. I'm told that Speaker Richardson is still, I'm going to use the word stuck in court as an attorney. We obviously have, those of us that are lawyers have the right to get continuances in court during the sessions, but he was forced to have to try a case that he was involved in. Not that I'm apologizing for him. There's probably no apology due. I mean, a man has a right to make a living, but I don't expect we're going to be hearing testimony from him today. Are there any members of the committee that wish to be heard prior to adjournment on any of the matters? We're going to have a debriefing tomorrow with the subcommittee on tax reform, but before that, is anybody 27? Good. Chairman Stevens?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the record, I've heard more than once that there are no taxing authorities that don't have a property tax. And just for the record, I served on city council for a few years and one in Chatham County, and there's more than one city in Chatham County that does not or has never had a property tax, so it can be done.
Thanks, sir. Number 15.
Just a couple comments. When we get debriefed, are we going to go over some of the questions that we've had totally with this tomorrow? Are we going to be allowed to ask those questions in that debriefing, so to speak? Just want to make sure, because it's just that I've got several questions I would have liked to ask the speaker today, and that I don't know about, and I have them. He's the author. We really haven't heard anyone here that's, I think, that really understood the bill. A lot of people had not read the bill that have come in here and don't understand from the testimony from the bill's process that we have now. I've just got several questions that I'd like to ask.
Well, I'm sure the speaker will allot you just plenty of time to answer those questions, and I mean that seriously. But in the meantime, I can tell you that Miss Lindsay Napier has been intimately involved in actually even the drafting of this bill. And I'm sure Lindsay would be glad. I'm not trying to promise you away, but if you have those questions and wish to submit them to her, right. She's a very, very capable attorney in her own right.
I understand.
And an MBA, and I'm sure she can get you a head start on that, and then the speaker could verify thereafter.
I understand. Thank you.
And we do want that. We absolutely want a clear, concise understanding of every word in this legislation before I'm going to ask you to vote on it.
Thank you.
Representative Flood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along those same lines, there are some clarifications of definitions in the bill, such as banking services and others that hopefully we'll get the chance to get more details on. As well, it would be great to have the most recent list of services that would be taxed and then the associated revenue with each of those line items so that we can see kind of where the revenue stream is going to come from.
A very valid concern, and I concur, and I hope we'll get to that. Anything further, Representative Flynn?
That's it.
Thank you, sir. Those are good comments. Representative Martin.
Mr. Chairman, just curious, do we have any additional speakers? I know we had a tomorrow morning at 10 is a to be determined as to additional speakers. Are we projecting that we'll have more public comment on the bill at that time, or a full committee meeting, or just a? I have not
had any phone request in the office for the committee office or anything further. So it's as far as I know now, and I probably wouldn't put y'all through just an hour's notice for a full committee meeting. There will not be a full committee meeting tomorrow.
Okay, well, that
but
said,
there may very well be more public hearing, but at the subcommittee level going forward.
That said, at this late hour, I don't know if we'll do it today, but I had actually an inquiry last night at my house that had heard part of our hearing on the web. I guess it's being web broadcast, and they wondered if somebody could go over the bill in its entirety. Maybe something like you suggested with Ms. Napier. I don't know if the subcommittee meeting will be web enabled tomorrow, but I think that might be something that would be good for the public at large to have the ability to understand the overview, perhaps the sheet that was given out to the members of the committee, if that pleases the chair.
It does, and I think it's essential with this legislation, since it is designed to be referenda legislation, that the public is, if anything, more entitled than we are to understand, because it's going to be their vote that makes the determination, not ours. And I do intend to facilitate every means I'm aware of to inform the public of exactly what the proposition is, if that's the will of this General Assembly at the end. And we can't sit here on the one hand and say we're open and transparent if we don't seek to do just exactly what you request. And I thank you for those comments. 22, Representative.
Mr. Chairman, as far as the meeting, those of us are not on the tax reform committee that's going to probably be meeting tomorrow to talk about these things. The thing that you did the other day with the sales tax committee and going over the bills and making everybody aware, so all the chairman knew what was going on. Is there any? I hate to miss out on anything since we've been in 2 days of this. Is there going to be a time that this group right here can get back together to kind of look at what the finalization of this is going to be, or is it something down the road that we need?
There's absolutely no question that there's going to be plenty of times. I mean, we're about to interject this proposition into the normal flow of things. These meetings have been a little extraordinary in the sense that I have sensed at least that this is critical legislation to the people of the state of Georgia. This is like extra credit in high school, what we've been doing the last couple of days, and tomorrow. We kick off on Monday, and it will be in the norm. I don't mean that condescendingly. Please don't take it that way. And that's a good question.
But these ideas that we've formulated here and from the public, they somewhere probably going to be incorporated somewhere. Will we get an opportunity to be a part of that when it's time?
Absolutely. You're part of this committee. You always will be. I think you're chairman of the subcommittees. And by the way, any members of this committee that are not on the tax reform subcommittee are hereby invited to be part of those deliberations. There's not necessarily even going to be a vote. Well, it won't be a vote, so please come on if you want to. There again, this is a learning curve. And I want to say this, I don't want anybody to take it the wrong way, but ladies and gentlemen, we got to get this right. If we've ever focused, we've got to get this right if it's going to get out of here. And that's our duty. That's what this committee is going to do. Whether you're for it or against it, we've got to vet it to every technical aspect of this. There cannot be an unintended consequence or any aspect of this that we just absolutely miss. We know some pros and cons, but analytically, it's 40 pages and a lot of time, but I'm asking y'all, I beseech you to give me your best effort ever. We'll wear this badge for a long time if it gets out of this place. So, and I'm confident I got the greatest committee in the whole place. I'm sure other chairmen may argue, but thank you for your attendance here today. Thank you for the commitment you've already shown. We'll look forward to seeing those of y'all that can come tomorrow. We want to thank the audience and everybody that's stayed with us. I've got one other comment too. 10 tomorrow, but it's going to be down to 133. I heard it said that there was a quote or two attributable to our Commissioner of Revenue. I certainly think we owe him the honor of hearing it directly from him. I don't know that I've ever heard him say he can't do a good job because he doesn't have the resources. All I've heard him say is how he could do a much better job. And to that end, I'm not going to be a part of being critical of that organization. And sometimes it's an overwhelming initiative they have to deal with. But if I hope maybe we can get Bart Graham himself to have an opportunity to tell us what he might have said or not said in that regard. Who's number one? Oh, good. Welcome. How are you?
Thank you. Happy New Year, Mr. Chairman.
Happy New Year to you. We're delighted to have you.
Good to be here. Listen, let me ask you this. Tomorrow the meeting starts at 10. Do you have any idea how long we'll be here? And 10 to about what, you know?
Again, I don't want you to take this flippantly. I want to say as long as it takes, but that statement sounds flippant. I would like to get out by 12, but the purpose of the meeting is to have a very fundamental understanding of the bill going forward. If that takes a little bit longer, I'm willing to stay. And y'all can do.
And that's of 900?
Yes, right. We're going to stay focused. There's enough here to absorb to where we don't need to get confused.
Okay, and so the speaker will be here.
I don't know that. I will be.
Okay.
And the chair of that committee will be. Okay. I can tell you that for sure, and the good Lord will it.
Okay.
The speaker will be there if he wants to be, I'm sure.
Okay, thank you.
Number 16. Wayne. Again, ladies and 24.
Just a question, Mr. Chairman. It's the tax reform subcommittee that's meeting tomorrow.
Yes.
Thank you.
But all members are welcome. If you still want to come and participate, we'll take all the help we can get. Intercommittee. We won't have public testimony tomorrow, though. We don't have anybody else. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's no further business to come before the committee, again, thank you. We stand adjourned.